So what I just led off with this is the 2023 budget presentation. This is preliminary. There'll no doubt be changes between now and the time it's presented in the warrant and voted at the town meeting, but this is where we start. Alex, next page. Okay, okay, yeah, I can see. So some of the things to keep in mind of the budget conditions that we're in. So our goals this year were to deliver a level service budget and deliver the same services to Hamilton residents, avoid a Proposition 2.5 override, to not add any additional programming unless it was absolutely necessary, make targeted changes in operations, minor reorganizations and things that would create efficiencies and some savings for ourselves. Our conditions also include that we're still dealing with the pandemic. As a result of that, costs for goods and services have gone up across the board. Purchasing is more expensive than it was. It's more challenging to find employees. So we had to keep those things in mind. And we want to remind you that some of the information in this budget is still in flux. The Regional School District has not yet adopted its final budget. The health insurance costs we're carrying them at a 10% increase. We have some additional joint programming costs to go through with some of our partners, and state aid has not yet been finalized. But so, next slide, please.
Joe, before we go forward, would you just briefly explain why it's necessary or desirable, rather, to avoid a Prop 2.5 override?
I think it's always important for us to show the town that we're able to live within our means. I think that overrides aren't a place where most communities want to go. We do our best to avoid them. It shows the taxpayer that we're taking our responsibility seriously, and we felt like we could manage that this year. I don't know what the future holds, but as much as possible, we want to be able to live within our means. So that,
I just want to comment. We, the town, continue to live within our means, and I think we've demonstrated that repeatedly to the taxpayer. But the school district doesn't seem to be capable of matching that.
Yeah, that's why we keep talking to them. So, so the FY23 budget proposal in front of you today is for $36,837,226 in total spending. That is town and schools. When we say schools, we mean both the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District and the Essex Aggie. Town spending in this budget is about $14,122,187, or about just under $600,000 increase over last year's spending. Most of that increase is driven by some of the pressures we cited earlier and regular salary increases that were negotiated in contracts. Schools increase is about $927,000 over last year, for a total budget, school budget of $22,715,039. In total, this represents a 4.3% increase over FY22. This budget does allow us to meet our required obligations under our financial policies, protect some free cash, general stabilization, capital stabilization, water enterprise earning, all where we need them to be. And it also allows us to put forward a moderate capital improvement spending plan that was reviewed and recommended by the capital committee and is reflected in the larger budget document you got earlier this week. I think on Thursday, you probably received this Thursday evening. Again, this document is also in preliminary form. It'll change between now and then, but a lot of the detailed information is in that budget. All right, we'll get into our revenue projections, and for that, I'll turn it over to Alex.
Okay, so thanks, Joe. So how we arrived at the $36,837,000 figure is based on sort of a variety of different revenue sources. The main being tax levy, local tax levy on residents. You can see in FY23, you take your previous year's levy limit, which is this current FY22, you add 2.5% to it, and then you project new growth. That brings us to our tax levy of $31,990. You add to that any debt that is taken exclusive of the tax rate, which is just over $1 million this year. And then this is just an unused capacity figure, sort of for illustrative purposes. The total tax levy for next year is going to be 32,793,109. That's our projected number. We budget in an allowance for abatement into the overlay, and this is to sort of offset uncollected tax revenues during the fiscal year. So we plan on having up to $250,000, and that's so we can continue our operations while those revenues remain, while we seek to collect them. State aid, we're projecting at 945,000. That's the same number that we actually received this year. You'll see that 902 was the figure that we had projected last year. 945 is the actual number. The House delivered their budget, their first cut of the budget this week, and that number was actually up around 900 and I think 75,000. So that's a higher number, and it also decreased our assessments. So that's good movement in two directions, meaning that they're assessing us for less than we had planned. So the check that we send to the state will be less, and the revenue that they send us for various programming will go up. So that's a good thing. And once we have a signed, sort of a governor's budget, I guess, we'll be able to modify this number, but we know that it is a conservative number right now. Moving forward into revenues, local receipts, we're projecting a slight increase here. Motor vehicle excise, we collected a little over $1 million in FY21. We're tracking to go above our projected 925 and 22. So I was comfortable projecting this number a little bit higher this year. Local receipts, this includes sort of a large pool of other different things that we can receive money for, and then meals tax for 55,000. That's been pretty stable, and with the pandemic, meals tax has been impacted probably more than any other local receipt for a total of 2.03 million. Transfers and other available funds, this $459,000 represents indirect costs that we charge to the water utility, the enterprise fund, and these are to offset sort of all of the various different staffing hours that go into managing and maintaining, administrating that fund. Free cash, right now we're carrying both the entire capital plan and then 20,000 in general stabilization for that number, and that's how you get to that 856,000. That number will likely go down based on a couple of different offsets. So we have some grant funding for some capital projects. We may look at putting a little more money into some of our various stabilization accounts based on how the budget shakes out over the next couple of weeks, just because I think it would be probably a best practice to look ahead towards the not only the town hall project, but other sort of big capital projects that we know are looming in the not too distant future. So when we add all those up, our total revenue is $36,837,226. And again, that's a projection, but it shouldn't be too far off that when the rubber meets the road here later on. This just represents a breakdown, it allows you to visualize where this revenue is coming from. You can see, the majority of it, the lion's share, is coming from local taxes. 945,000, that's this red wedge, that's state aid. Green is local receipts, so this is our second biggest sort of pool of revenue. Transfers and other funds, this is sort of the offsets from the water utility, and then I think there's a small $2,000 transfer in from the cemeteries in there, and then 856,000 from free cash. So that is our sort of revenue summary. I'm going to hand it back to Joe for expenses.
Thank you, Alex. Real quick, go back to that revenue pie chart, please, real quick. So just to like drive home the point, it looks like, when you look at it, you say, okay, so the big blue area is kind of all the tax levy, but all those other colors except for red are also all still generated locally. All of our revenue, 97.45% of our revenue, comes from the taxpayers in the town of Hamilton. Just want to be clear about that. Okay, Alex, expenditures. So this is just a kind of high-level look at the various subcategories of town schools government spending. We tried to show you here the percent change from last year and what percentage of the budget they make up in our expenditures. So general government makes up all the pretty much most of the functions at town hall. That includes town clerk, all the finance functions, the town manager's office, board of selectmen, FinCom, planning and inspections. That's all there, and it makes up about 5.3% of our. Makes up about 6.1% of our budget at $2,253,000. Public safety is a spend of about $3.5 million, and that's police, fire, and ECO, and it's responsible for about 9.5% of our budget. Public works is $2.189 million, and again, just under 6% of the budget. Health and human services is the smallest portion of our budget, and that includes both public health operations and the council on aging, at just $335,000, or 2.7% of our budget. Culture and recreations, which includes our share of the shared library and the shared recreation department, and that is 5% of our budget at just a little over $1 million. Bearing in mind that the recreation department does get a significant amount of its funding from the revolving account. All we really fund there are some basic supplies and equipment, and the two salaries, our portion of the two salaries for the director and the assistant director. Schools, again, both regional school districts are counted here for 61.66% of our budget, or almost $23 million. And another big piece of our budget is known as unclassified, and I know that seems like a nebulous term, and people always get a little uncomfortable with that, but this includes our obligations to our free cash policies. It includes unemployment, includes health insurance, employee health insurance, includes debt service, and a number of other items that just don't fit under any specific governmental unit. So again, total spend is $36,837,000, about a 4.38% increase over last year. Yeah. And again, pie chart, just because everybody learns differently or remembers information differently, this shows the breakdown.
Joe, excuse me. What was the town increase year to year, exclusive of schools?
It's about, I think it's about 4.5%. I don't have it in front of me, David, but I think it's about 4.5%.
Yeah, David, we can get you that information afterwards. I mean, that we have it in the current presentation. We have it broken down by the subcategory. So general government was 5.3%, but public safety was only 1.5%. Public works was 5.4% increase. Public health and human services was only 2.7%. Culture and recreation was 5%. So overall, including the schools, it's a 4.38% increase. But we don't. I don't have it. Actually,
you don't have exclusive of schools.
I don't have exclusive of schools, but we can work that up for you and send that information to both committees after the meeting.
It's about 4.5 or 4.6. It's on my office computer. I have all this, but
yeah, I did some quick math on slide 1 or 2, and I think they're both right around 4.4, somewhere in that vicinity.
Thank you.
David, I just want to say the reason that ours is it may be higher than we had anticipated, and that's to try to bring us back to a trajectory that we had been on previously. You'll note that last year and this year, the town has faced the actual budget reductions on our bottom line spending, which is very unusual. And so the 4.5% sort of is a bit of a correction back to a trajectory that we had been on. Just want to note that.
And I'd also add to that we have just under $900,000 in projected and proposed spending for capital. We had spent less than $500,000 on capital in each of the last 2 years, so that's almost doubling of our capital expenditure. So that will kind of move the needle a little bit more than you really want it to as well. So back to this expenditure breakdown. We're back at the pie chart that shows what we just showed you in the graph for the table a minute ago. The two biggest areas of our budget, unfortunately, are classified in schools, but we do a good job of spending on public safety and public works as well. So at this point, we'll start to get into the individual departments. we'll start off with my department, the town manager's budget, and we'll kind of go through a kind of summary level and talk about some of the drivers. And each slide after this, Alex or I will introduce the slide with the town manager and with the department head rather, and the department head will be able to, go through what some of the considerations were in their budget. So in this budget here this year, we have a 2.2% increase in personnel expenses, and we have a 22.2% increase in operating expenses. This is largely, almost entirely, because we've added some money into the consulting line to get ourselves some additional help with grant management during the early parts of the budget phase, in discussions with FinCom and discussions earlier in the year with some members of the select board. And internally, between Alex and I, we've recognized that we really need some help with getting some more grants, but also managing them once we get here. And once they get here, that grantsmanship is many times it's a full-time job, but we don't have the capacity to have that. But we do need some additional help, kind of managing the grants once we get them and making sure we're reporting properly.
And we see return on our investment pretty quickly on that stuff, right, Joe?
Yes.
I don't know if you have a summary of how many grants we've got this year, but
I don't right now, but we can get you one. We can get you one. I wouldn't count in that CARES or ARPA, which just came to us through state and federal changes. But there are a number of grants that we did go out and get. But we could have been seeking more grants if we'd had a little additional assistance in that area. All right. And does anybody have any questions about the town manager's budget?
Joe, I do. This is Darcy. Can you tell me the 22,791, what percent of the total grants that we got this year, what percentage of that would cover the cost? I'm just wondering what the ratio is.
Yeah, so that's the operating. Thank you, Darcy. That's a good question. The operating expense line shows a $22,700 increase. We actually put $30,000 into the budget for grants, but we saw a couple of decreases in some of our leases and food supply costs and things that we were doing. So I offset some of the $30,000 increase for grantmanship by taking away a couple of other areas and shrinking some of our non-personnel related line items in that budget. Relevant to what you just asked and what Bill mentioned before, Alex and I can go back and add up all the grants that we got this year and identify, what we were able to do with no money and what we might, project out what we might be able to do with having a little bit more assistance in that area. So. Yeah,
that's great because I look at this as an investment. So that's great. If we can show that it is an investment, giving value to the taxpayers, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doug.
If I can add a little context, most of the kinds of grants that we apply for, you all likely know this, but they typically have a a component that allows for administrative charges like this. So, and that number is usually between 10 and 25%, not always, but usually. And so, Darcy, say we got $500,000 in grants in a given year, then we could typically apply, anywhere from, 50 to 125,000 of that towards the overhead, like the management of those grants. So to give you just a ballpark number without specifics, it would typically fall into sort of that kind of arena.
Okay, thank you.
So you're aware, yep.
Okay, thanks. So next department up is finance department. So I will let Alex talk about what he's got going there.
All right, so finance. So this is my first run at a departmental budget here, as you likely are all aware. The finance department is sort of an umbrella department that encompasses finance and IT and accounting, sort of all jumbled into one area, and then the assessor's office, and then the treasurer collector's office, and those make up sort of the finance operation. I decided to, for this presentation, to sort of to show the consolidated request here, and then we'll go into the assessors specifically, because there are some changes that we're looking to make in the assessors. And so why don't I walk through these numbers and we'll take questions, and then we'll move on to the assessors if that's okay. So you'll notice that there are personnel expenses, an increase of about $11,000. That represents salary changes, so sort of standard step and raise for myself and Diane. And it also includes a sort of a I guess, a promotion in a sense for Diane Katz, who's the assistant town accountant. She's been with the town for about 20 years and she's critical for our operation. This kind of brings her back into line, closer in line, at least, with sort of a market rate for the services she provides, which are truly invaluable to the town. I don't know if I can state that enough. She's very important to what we do. And so this is a recognition of that. There's also an increase of about $41,000 in operating funds. A lot of that is tied to increased expenses with our audit. So our normal required municipal audit, and then also an aside cost for what's called a single audit, where if you spend $750,000 in federal funding in any given year, you're required to do what's called a single audit. And so that would be sort of outside of the four corners of our regular municipal audit. And so that represents a cost there. And then there's also a couple of increased operating costs. Some of it is tied to a regional grant program that we're actually involved in. And this is for IT cybersecurity. And it's with a number of different local communities. And so we get, that represents our match on top of the funding that the state is giving for that. It's a community compact grant. David, you had asked about this a few months ago, and this is part of the community compact program. It's been being developed for quite some time. And so this is sort of represents the actual financial ask for that. There's also an increase in our IT services. Andy Wood, who is our IT consultant, I guess, and so it represents an increase there. And also shifting some costs from the town manager's budget that are tied to some software programming that we shifted them into finance where they maybe are better suited. So that sort of represents an increase there. This number, this 52,000, is a little bit inflated in a sense, but it is a bit of a jump. So assessors, we'll look at this number specifically in a moment, but you'll notice there's some pretty big movement. Salaries are going down and operating costs are going up, and that represents our inability to hire a director of assessors. The market for assessors is really challenging right now. There's a lot of openings statewide. This is, in a sense, sort of a dying art, and unfortunately, there's not a dearth of people that are capable of doing this work, and the ones that are being paid handsomely right now. And so we've engaged with Wyndham in sort of exploring a shared assessor model. And so that is something that continues to be developed and that we are planning towards. And this will allow us to share sort of on a like maybe a 2/3, 1/3 basis with Hamilton taking the lead on this, to share the director services, and at the same time also maintaining an assistant assessor in-house, so we always have staff available for residents to come and ask questions, etc. Jane Dooley in that office has been sort of promoted to the assistant assessor. She's been on her own in that office since my first week here, actually. Our assessor put in his notice my second day on the job, and so she's been fantastic, done a great job. So you'll notice operating expenses go up. That represents some additional consulting money and additional software expenses. And we can talk about that more in a moment. And then for treasurer collector, this represents personnel costs going up, sort of normal wage increases, and then some just moderate operating increases, which are tied to tax title proceedings, I believe. So that's sort of finance as a whole. And so maybe we can take questions on anything related to the overall, leaving assessing questions for in a moment, if that's okay. If there are questions, I guess. All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Oh, yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
Is it worth drawing out the federal funding to avoid a single time audit? So trying to just spend 750 this year, 750 next year, or 749?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in FY22, our current year, that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're going to take that tax. We can avoid the single audit because there is so much federal funding that is sort of floating around right now. This is something that we'll likely face a single audit for our federal funding at some point over the next couple of years when we look at the CARES expenditures and the ARPA expenditures that we're likely to face. I think that we can get away with FY22 without doing it, but when we get into FY23, I don't know if it's going to be possible because we have the pre-treatment project coming, and that because we're planning on using about $1 million in ARPA funding for it. That tied to the other ARPA expenses that we will have, sort of our public health, et cetera. Among other things, we're likely to hit that $750,000 trigger. It's possible that we don't, based on how that cash flows in the pre-treatment project, but we'll have to see. I would expect in 23 that we will face that, but it's not set in stone yet. If there are delays on that project, it may do kind of what you're saying. It would like cascade some of that money into FY24, and then we could avoid that trigger if possible. So we'll see, basically. But yes, that is a good strategy and one that we're currently sort of employing.
Sorry, Darcy, go ahead.
I have a question. How much would it cost us to have a single audit? How much does it cost the town?
I think it's about $7,500. I have an actual quote from Clifton Larson Allen, who's our auditing firm. I don't know it off top of head, but it's I think it was $75,000 or $8,000, somewhere in there. And okay. It stands aside and is performed around the same time frame as the municipal audit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Joe, I have a very general question, and probably is not the right time to ask, but as Alex mentioned, we've had a lot of positions open over the last year. What happens with all that salary that we've budgeted that we didn't spend? Where does that end up in your line items here?
It becomes free cash.
So
do we have?
It becomes free cash. It falls at the bottom line as unreserved fund balance. So the two ways to collect to create free cash are your receipts come in higher than you anticipate, or you don't spend everything that you budget. So for instance,
do we track the free cash by where it comes from, or it just falls to the bottom? Are we going to look at a summary of that today, or is that not part of this presentation?
It's not part of this presentation because at least for FY22, we're obviously still in the middle of the year, but when we do have some breathing room, we'll collect our FY21 actuals and we'll be able to track those sources better, Bill, and we can put together a sort of spreadsheet that showcases those.
But we will have free cash.
Yeah, we're projecting about $3.6 million in free cash from the FY21 budget, part of which we will use. The free cash that we use in the FY23 budget actually comes from FY21. We're projecting about, and what did Alex, about an $835,000 free cash spend, but most of that's for capital.
Yeah, and that's not it's not 3.6 million from the FY21 budget. It's 3.6 million that we have certified in total free cash. So about 1.6 million, I think, about. It hasn't been certified yet, but that'll be our FY21 like addition of free cash, and then that'll carry on to what was there before that. Per our stabilization funds, we're required to keep like a floor of 5% of our total operating budget, which is puts us in the $1.8 million range. So we're required to carry that in addition to some money in various stabilizations. So just to make that a little more clear. All right, so we'll move into the assessors here. So I noted that we're
Alex. I'm sorry. I apologize. As to the 1.6 that you're projecting, what proportion can you estimate is from vacant positions versus other reasons?
Man, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I would say it's probably in the 40-50% range, but that's a guess at this point. I'm not certain.
So would that suggest that the balance is attributable to over budgeting?
I don't think that it's over budgeting. I think that it's real challenges in hiring. The budget represents actual needs, and then fulfilling those needs is a real challenge to hire people right now. And we're back to the drawing board, for example, on the assistant that we had hired in the finance department, a part-time assistant. She was here for about a month, and then she got a better offer elsewhere, and she walked after being here. And so so that money that's, I think it's like $24,000 for that specific position. We spent maybe $500 of it. And so, that's rolling right now. And if we get to the end of 22 without being able to hire someone, which I hope is not the case, but that'll end up closing to free cash.
I was
You
unclear.
could actually argue it's under budgeting because we need these resources because they're not running at the full capacity of the town, and we're not hiring people because they're not paying enough. So it's sort of although we have free cash, we have unfilled positions. We're not filling these positions because people are getting better offers elsewhere. So it's sort of a catch-22.
Right. I was unclear. I understood that about 40 to 50% is the estimate for unfilled positions. So I was asking as to the reason for the balance.
Can I take
the balance.
So the balance would be when we exceed our revenues. So what we mean by that is you don't want to be really overly rosy in projecting how much money we're going to take in local receipts. We don't want to anticipate that we're going to beat last year's number in excise tax, for instance, or beat last year's number in meals tax collection, because we don't really know what's going to happen year to year. So we project very responsibly. We project conservatively how much we're going to take in local receipts. Just because we beat them in a year doesn't mean that we were, over budgeting. It means that we were trying to make sure that we didn't leave ourselves short of cash in the given year. So if we project a revenue, we have to meet that revenue. Otherwise, we're going to have an upended budget. So, for instance, this year, when you look at some of the local receipts that we're projecting them under what our actual was for the most recent fiscal year that closed, but we're still projecting them over what we previously projected them at, because we can see that the receipts were going up. There was no way during the pandemic for us to anticipate, for instance, that excise tax was going to shoot up, because as soon as people got out of their homes, they all went out and bought new cars. There was no way for us to predict that was going to happen. So our excise tax was really, in FY21, was really a lot higher than we anticipated. Another thing that happened was building permit fees came in higher. Part of that was because we switched to the new ISD with a better building commissioner and a little bit better tracking. But at the same time, after being locked in their homes, lots of people did home improvement projects. And so that meant an increase in the amount of money we were able to collect in inspections. So we couldn't have predicted that heading into the pandemic. We had to project cautiously. If you remember back to June of 2020, when we were passing the FY21 budget, we all were worried that the pandemic was going to cause a recession and we were going to actually lose revenue. So we projected very conservatively down, and then for various reasons, those things didn't happen. So I wouldn't necessarily say we over budgeted. I think we responsibly kept our projection for revenue to a conservative level.
Thank you.
Joe, I just want to pile on it. I do think when the dust settles, having just sort of a look at free cash, I think would be the FY21 since it's closed, and just seeing the sort of sources of that free cash. And I think looking forward to next year, having that sort of in the November, December timeframe would be perfect before we enter into budget season, knowing from the previously closed fiscal year, just so we can keep it in mind in terms of things if we, potentially are over budgeting or under budgeting something. So just for few, but I would, whenever that's available this spring, it would be interesting to look back in FY21.
I agree. I think that's a good idea.
One thing I'd like to add about revenue sources is also new growth is something that we, don't want to. We came in at about $400,000 in new growth this year, and that was over what we budgeted. And so, Joe touched on this. You always want to budget conservatively, because if you end up over budgeting and then your revenues coming short, you can really screw up the operation. So, but yeah. John Prulich, excellent suggestion. We will look at free cash sources, and Bill Olson as well. Great suggestions. We'll be looking at where the free cash is coming from and how we can sort of tighten up those areas of the budget.
Right. Thank you.
All right. So the assessors. So what we're looking to do here, and I sort of briefly touched on this, is a shared assessing model with Wenham, where we have a shared director. And then an assistant in Hamilton's office, and then an assistant in some capacity in Wenham, which is sort of up to them to figure out how they want to run that. And then an increase in consulting, which will allow sort of some of the gaps that exist when you reduce your full-time employee load. That'll create sort of a little extra work. And so we can gobble some of that up with consulting, which theoretically will end up a little bit cheaper than doing it, with an extra staff person. And so this total bottom line number represents a sort of what we're comfortable with in achieving that, being able to hire somebody who is a high quality assessor, somebody who knows what they're doing, can sort of lead a couple of offices in two similar communities. And then, making sure that our assessor, the office is sort of achieving what they need to, leaning into consulting if they need to. This will reduce our total sort of currently budgeted FTEs we have 2.1, so we have 2 full-time staff and then one that's I think 10 hours a week is what they're budgeted at for valuations. This will reduce that to, we're calling it 1.6, which is represents sort of 2/3 of the director and then the full staff in our current office. So that's the plan moving forward. With the instability in Wenham, our sort of discussions have been sort of put on pause a little bit, but there is interest in continuing this with the board over there. So that's kind of the path that we're walking right now.
Alex, what if, do you have a plan B, and is there a timeline associated with this initiative? For example, how long are we willing to go under these conditions? And if we go a long time under these conditions without making any moves, do you have a plan B?
Yeah, great. We do have a plan B. Joe, do you want to talk about this, or do you want? Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Yeah. So the amount of money that we're requesting in the assessors division actually allows us to have a good plan B. As Alex said, Jane Dooley's been doing a fantastic job since July, kind of holding the fort down by herself. She has interest in learning how and getting certified to be an assessor. And we certainly want to help any of our employees improve themselves and get more knowledge. So if things fall apart with Wenham for one reason or other, and I'm fairly confident that we'll be able to make a deal there. But if things fall apart for whatever reason, we can go forward with Jane and spend some of this money to get her start taking her classes, and we would shift some of the money from personnel to operating and buy more of the consulting time that we've been utilizing with Patriot this year to kind of support her, and then we'd bring in a smaller another clerical position, so they'd be back to having 2 people there. Jane, as she's working towards becoming an assessor, another clerical position, and then some additional consultative help until Jane was able to take over the role of assessor down the road. So that's kind of our backup plan. Jane's aware of it. We've spoken about both these options with her. She's on board with the first option. It gives us an opportunity to hire, as Alex said, hire a high-level qualified assessor to manage both towns. The real trick is in what's going on Wenham side. I've had some good conversations both with the previous town administrator and now with Catherine Harrison, the chair of the select board there. She's optimistic that we can get it done. The next steps for that will be kind of working with the interim town administrator who just started in Wenham. Fortunately, that's Tom Younger. He was the interim previously, so we already have a working relationship and he already understands their operation. They just have to circle around what their number is, because on their side, it's going to be a little bit more expensive for them, and they have to figure out how to make that work on their side. Once they do that, we can have KP Law draft an intermunicipal agreement that will go to both select boards for consideration. Our goal on both sides, our stated goal, is to have an IMA ready for the boards to consider probably end of February, beginning of March. If we get to middle of February and we're still not ready to draft an IMA, that's when Alex and I internally may shift to, let's start getting ready for plan B. But we've got time between now and June to kind of put everything together. So we feel like we can handle this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Darcy, also on as far as the timeline goes, this is we've been talking about this for months now, and we've been projecting it towards like sort of flipping the switch, as you will, when FY23 starts. So that's kind of the time frame that we're looking at as we transition into FY23 to have this sort of in place.
Okay, thanks.
Certainly, yep. Okay, so any other questions about this assessors, sort of our working plan here? All right, we'll move into HR. So HR, the only changes in here are personnel expenses. This is related to Michelle, she's a shared HR employee with 3 towns with us, Manchester and Rockport. And so maybe I can just hand this to Michelle to sort of discuss her operation. And then also it's worth noting that through an IMA that roughly 2/3 of costs associated with HR come back from those 2 towns to Hamilton. So this $98,000 is sort of an artificial number in a sense, where about 2/3 of that comes back. So,
and if I could just real quickly explain that. So the sound financial way to handle any expense in your budget is to include all of it in your budget. And then if you have revenue that's going to offset it, you show that on the other side. So in this case, we showed the entire expense for the human resources director in our budget because we're the fiduciary and the primary link in the IMA. We're responsible for those expenses. She's an employee of the town of Hamilton, and we sell her services to the other 2 towns. So those show up on the revenue side. So when we, a few strings back when we were looking at revenue, they were in that number. They were nestled down in there, and you'll be able to find them in the larger budget book. Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be able to talk with you from our warm and cozy home. Although I've been in this position for 18 months, this is, like Alex, my first run department. So I just need to thank Alex and David Wenger I'm one of those people that I need to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And, they really took a lot of time. So thank you both. Since this position started about 18 months ago, I've actually been approached by 3 other communities, very interested in the program. Fascinated. I think Hamilton was probably one of the first ones to actually do something like this across the board. And unfortunately, that for 18 months, I've been in only like a reactive state. We haven't been able to be proactive. So many things, and other towns are kind of hearing the buzz on it going, oh, we need something like that. We need something like that. So it's been great. It's a lot of fun, a lot of work, but I think we're really accomplishing some great things.
Michelle, could you describe just generally what responsibilities you've undertaken for Hamilton?
Sure. I'm glad that you asked that because I put some work into taking a recap for my past year. So far, we've filled 12 positions within the town, and that's not including anything that falls under the health department for COVID tracers, part-time nurses, and things like that. We do have 2 positions right now in the works. We're doing 2nd round interviews for the police department right now. And our biggest challenge that we're fighting right now is finding a public health nurse. So if anybody has any suggestions, please send them my way. But it's almost like it's the same idea. And we were looking for an assessor. The time that we posted an assessor position, we actually had 13 active municipalities looking for assessors. On the go-to website for municipal government is MMA. And there were 13 active positions at that time. So it's a lot of it is, working outside and having conversations and recruiting and things like that. We've also brought in some training through COVID. In collaboration with Joe, we did some Zoom training. We brought in a couple trainers just to kind of help people process with stress and organization and communication. Just a few months ago, we did a Board of Selectmen retreat. And for almost like for a preview, because it's something that we'd like to bring across all boards and town employees, that will focus on diversity, unconscious biasness, which is a hot topic right now, and inclusion. Having Zoom and having chat rooms is harassment and bullying is a huge thing on the forefront right now, and people sometimes are doing it and not even realizing that they're doing it. So those type of trainings are super important to bring through the town for everyone across the board, and it just leaves us not being liable.
That's right.
Thank you.
all right. So we'll shift gears here away from HR. Thanks, Michelle. Town clerk is next up. Corinne Kale, a lot of you likely know her. She is not enduring a blizzard right now. She's out of town somewhere warm. And so I told her, no prob, I'll take your budget. So there are some increases in, so town clerk and elections and registration, those 2 sort of divisions fall under the town clerk here. And so the clerk salaries, those are tied to sort of normal steps and raises. And then the personnel expenses associated with elections has to do with needing more staff for elections. In addition to, there's some increased police detail costs associated with running more elections. And then there are also some operating expense increases. These are tied to some to software requirements. Postage, believe it or not, is a big driver here. Vote by mail is a requirement now, and that's these are sort of like unfunded mandates that we all love so much. Those are reflected here in this budget. Corinne's been fantastic to work with. I just want to say she's great to work with. She brings a lot of sort of past government experience, and she's a real great resource for the town. So in her stead here, any questions that I can answer in her place?
Yeah, I do have some questions about the votes bill just passed the Massachusetts legislature. And I know that you were talking about unfunded mandates. I'm really concerned that Corinne have all the resources and support, whatever it is she needs to make sure our elections are run so that nobody can question them. So I want to make sure that she has everything she needs to make an efficient work to get her work done without any questions, so people can't question it. I really am concerned about that because it's happening across this country with election officials. So she really does need everything she would require. I just want to make sure we support her in that, because voting is everything, really.
Yeah, I think that everything she asked for is in this budget. I think that
Okay, great.
both Alex and I and the FinCom, when we met in December, we all very supportive of what Corinne's done in that office. In the time that she's been town clerk, she's really professionalized all delivery services, but particularly elections. And we haven't really questioned her requests for increases because we understand that the importance of them. So
Thank you.
everything she's asked for is there.
And if she needs police protection, we can provide that. But Joe and Alex, I just wanted to comment that during that budget review, there was discussion of not going forward prospectively with special town meeting. And the savings that would ultimately produce. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, it's up to the Board of Selectmen to determine if we need a special town meeting. I'm certainly in favor of not trying to have one. It's really going to come down to town meetings, a lot of work for everybody. And when we're doing them twice a year, it just makes things pile on top of each other. Generally, at this point, since I've been here, we've had a special town meeting every year, and so we're doing all the prep work, getting ready, having the town meeting, and then we're coming right out of that and getting right into closing out with the state the previous fiscal year, and then trying to create the budget documents. And if I didn't have a special town meeting, I'd be happy to spend that extra time getting an early jump on our budget planning for the next fiscal year. So we just have to wait and see what transpires. Sometimes these things are forced on us by things beyond our control. Things come up after town meeting that need to be dealt with. We're going to try our best to avoid one. But
Right. And there would also be some budget actual savings of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, if you have it every year, it's not very special, right? So,
Yes.
yeah. So, we internally are doing everything we can to avoid it. It is, like Joe said, a big administrative challenge to run 2 town meetings if you can only get away with doing just one. So, and Corinne shares those sentiments, I think.
Is there any way to quantify the costs of, I know there's sort of direct hard costs, and then there's, time and resources, which is probably even the bigger one. But if there's some way to quantify that, I think it would be interesting. And because I do agree that going forward, it should be, we're only having them when we absolutely have to. For example, last fall, we absolutely had to have it because of the corrections we needed to make. But I think in a lot of years, it's because it's become so commonplace. Things just get, if they don't make it for ATM, they know they're going to just push them to STM. And I'd rather be in a only do it if we have to. And I think if we understand those costs, we could potentially, I don't know if it's possible to increase other reserve funds so that if there's something we need to do, say FinCom, reserve transfer to cover something that might normally be done through an STM, we might be able to avoid having them every year.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I don't know how we would really quantify all of the costs, but we could attempt to.
More the hard costs, I think.
The hard costs, those are easy enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we're stuck outside again, that's by far the biggest cost is a tent rental.
Right.
I mean, these things are not.
Bite your tongue. We're not going outside again.
So, yeah, so the hard costs we can figure out what the actual costs associated with were, and then it'll raise some eyebrows. I think it is very expensive.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Yep.
All kidding aside, just an outdoor time meeting, while a lot of fun once we're there on that day, and I feel like they've been very positive overall as far as an experience standpoint. But bear in mind that we haven't changed the date of our town meeting under the town bylaws, so we're going to be the first Saturday in April. And if everybody can just think back to the last few years, what it's like the first Saturday in April, if we have to try to do an outdoor town meeting at the first Saturday in April, I think we're all going to be still wearing our winter gear, gloves, galoshes. It's not my first instinct to try to do one outdoors this year. So we'll be as safe as we can. So next budget up, I think, is planning and inspections and conservation. Here, I'll give a quick intro, and then we'll have both Patrick and Rich Maloney, our building commissioner. Largely, these budgets are just being driven by some salary increases. I'll make note of one in particular in planning. We're increasing the grade for the planning and inspections director. A number of years ago, when the town first adopted the wage and classification scale, the finance director, public works director, and planning and inspections director were all on the same grade. For a variety of reasons since then, both the DPW director and the finance director have been elevated a step, while the planning director had stayed at his grade 20, and incurred additional duties. The planning and inspections director oversees all the budgeting and administration for planning and the inspections department and the conservation commission. He helps to coordinate the CPC, Affordable Housing Trust, the Hamilton Historic District Commission. He is hard at work on the master planning committee, and for the last 2 years, until we hired the health director in November, he had been also kicking in and helping administratively manage the health department functions. So I think it's, given all his duties and how the role has grown over the last few years, we thought it was fair to return him to the same grade as the finance director and the DPW director. So there's a little bit of an additional bump this year for the planning director, but we feel that it's justifiable. As far as the other parts of the budget, I would let Patrick and Rich Maloney speak to the different portions of their budget. Patrick and Rich.
Thank you, Joe. I do appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. In a general way, you'll see that the personnel expenses have increased the ordinary 2%, which is common with the rest of town government. Everyone has fallen prey to the level of inflation that we're all experiencing. However, I know many in the private sector aren't seeing any increases, so we're very appreciative of those modest increases that this budget provides. Conservation Commission is addressed by our agent. His name is Brian Colleran, doing a great job. He is advising me that there's probably about 25% more work per week than what he can get to. That may be a result of a very large project that has been submitted to the town for Conservation Commission review of the FinCom as well as at the planning board. But I am monitoring that, and it may be something we may need to address in the near future. His time allotment per week right now is 19 hours. So if we do increase that, it may kick it into a benefited position, which I know is something that we've always worked to try to not break that barrier. But I will tell you that I do think that Hamilton is being discovered. There are properties that are being sold that are being considered for development purposes. And I do think we've got more available property than a lot of other surrounding communities. And like I say, it's starting to be discovered. And I do think that, focusing on quality of life issues, as the Conservation Commission and Department, as well as planning, as well as inspectional services, do our best to continue to make quality of life advancements and focusing on the things that make livability in Hamilton better. But both the planning salaries are just mine, as well as a minute taker. We are required in conservation planning, and we administer ZBA assistance through inspectional services. Each of those focus areas require that we have minute takers being provided. As you're aware, our inspectional services department is part of an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Wenham. We continue to, since this past spring, we have been the lead agency in overseeing the management and provision of services in all of those inspectional services areas, which includes Rich Maloney. We're terrifically pleased that he's here. He's given us tremendous experience and knowledge. He works well with other departments, myself, provides boards with assistance and written reports in a way that we really haven't had the benefit of that before. So I really feel like we've got a good safety net there. We do also have part-time inspectors in electrical inspections as well as gas and plumbing. Those gentlemen are providing us ongoing services as they are as part of the IMA with Wenham. We do have fill-in people also to work with us when our ordinary inspectors are either ill or on vacation or pursuing ongoing educational requirements. As you have heard me say before, inspectional services requires that they keep their certifications up. So every year we make sure our guys obtain their certifications, keep them up, and provide us with those best practices and best services for the community. So I believe the split between Hamilton and Wenham is generally about 2/3 for Hamilton, 1/3 for Wenham. That's a little bit off, but that generally speaking is the split between the two communities. Any questions?
Patrick, could you speak to the revenue change, if any, based upon inspectional services? That is, has our inspectional services produced enhanced revenue?
Yeah, we have seen over the last 2 years, as Joe was earlier mentioning, that a lot of people during the COVID period were recognizing, we need to make some improvements here at home. And frankly, the 8 years that I've been here, I think the majority of development in our community has been people reinvesting in their properties. And I think a lot of that had to deal with COVID over the last 2 years. But I think it's also an important point out of this is the fact that interest rates have really been low. And I think people have really wanted to take advantage of that and invest in place rather than invest in new properties, which may or may not be in the community. So we have definitely been increasing in our revenue generation for the permit fees here in town. Rich may have a better handle on what the exact numbers are.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the kind words, Patrick. I know we issued 961 total permits last year. I don't have the revenue side of that. It's in the local receipts. I'm not sure what that number is. Alex may have that specific breakout for what we pulled in the last. Well, the permits are issued by calendar year, and I know the budget's fiscal year. But so last year, again, we just totaled the permits up: building, plumbing, electric, and gas at 961.
Yeah, I don't, in front of me, I don't have it, David, but I do have it on my work computer, the permit increase. I think that it was an increase of, if I recall, 5 to 10% over the previous year in terms of revenue.
So I had a question on, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bill.
I had a question on that because I don't want to discuss the merits of potential projects because that's a different discussion, but it seems to be every couple of years we have a large project in town. And so we collected a lot of revenue for the project, and then the next year maybe we don't have any. So in terms of permit costs, how do we, as we look forward to maybe larger project happening on a, every other year, every third year, how do we sort of flatten the line on that to make sure we don't have, we need a reserve fund, the fund sort of like, because once again, I'm going back to the conservation discussion. I think it's very important we don't shortchange ourselves on reviewing conservation issues. We have a very small department right now reviewing the merits of a $40 million plus project in town. And if we don't look at all, if we don't spend the time and money to look at those things, we might make decisions in haste. So trying to figure out how we utilize our revenue from larger projects over multiple years so we have those resources available. So it's kind of a multi-phase question here, but I'm just trying to figure out how we look ahead to larger projects, larger revenue sources that may not happen every year to help fund our department.
I like that point a lot, Bill. I think that would be a really helpful approach for us to take so we could have a little bit softer delivery and use of that money in a way that I think would better fit having a continued level of service from our staff with more resources than we do right now. So I have great appreciation for that.
Patrick, could you, or Bill, could you discuss whether you're satisfied with the efficacy of our current ability to track and not miss the need for permitting by residents?
The fact that we have much greater delivery of building inspectional services now than we've had heretofore. We've got eyes in the field that are a lot more assertive and a lot more focused than what we've had heretofore. So we're catching more people. But I think, it has a lot to do with education in the community, and Rich is really good about advising people. Hey, folks, I see what you're doing. Don't want to put a stick in your spokes, but permits necessary for what you're doing, come see me tomorrow. So he's really super cooperative, very educational. He'd rather help people do what it is they need to do than have them dealing with punitive kinds of things, because we want to help them invest in their property, because ultimately that means that they have greater worth, that we have greater tax income from.
The funding of the master plan is not through your department, as I understand it. It's through Joe's department.
Yes, sir.
But so that's 150,000 investment. Would you please comment to all of us your take thus far on the status of the master plan?
Thank you. A good time to address that. I will candidly tell folks that we had a consultant who maybe didn't have a full grasp of what we needed up front. She was dealing with some personal family issues that had a fairly unfortunate control of how she dealt with things. We've since had a shakeup in the project management. We now have the head of the planning department now being the primary individual who's providing us with the assistance and product that's coming to the master plan committee. I'd say that we're probably about 40% into the process. We've just now gotten some really good information regarding land use, regarding economic development considerations in the community. We're working into and wrestling with what a public survey needs to be in order for us to have a better understanding of what's truly important to Hamilton residents and how do we work with those sentiments and build that into a future focus for the community. So I appreciate the question and the opportunity to address that, David.
Thank you.
Can we get next week? Can we get maybe a revenue chart of over the last 10 years of our permit revenue to see if it's flat line or if it peaks and valleys? So that'd be good to see that as we forecast and plan for the future.
No problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else for planning, inspections, conservation, or should we move into public works?
I'll
Darcy?
just make a quick comment, if I may, to Rosie. Just, I agree that in terms of the Conservation Commission, Brian is doing an excellent job of catching events, oftentimes after the fact, though, of people who are perhaps not quite in compliance with our bylaw and taking steps to remedy that, bringing a lot of those things to the Conservation Commission. And so he's indeed very busy. And then the second comment I'd like to make is regarding the master plan. I agree that we got off to a bit of a unsettled start, but I have every faith that the person, Jim Reardon, who is now in charge, is indeed getting us back on track and feeling that our money is being well spent. He has also withdrawn, I believe it's 2 of his previous invoices, so that he is also cognizant of the financial investment from the town.
Thank you, Rosie.
We ready to move on here?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. All right, public works. So I believe that Tim Olson is on with us. Oh, there he is. Hey, Tim. He's in the middle of a snowstorm in case we all forgot.
Should we start with the snow budget?
All right, I'll just hand it to you, Tim.
So a lot of, thanks, everybody. Snow is ramping up outside, so guys are doing a really good job so far. It's going to be a long haul, probably going to be here 24-hour plus. So let's start with facilities. That's the biggest thing in the facilities budget is that we had Mark Shaw resign back in November. Since that point, myself and my assistant Pete Cobb have taken on the responsibilities of the facilities technician. Pete's pretty much the boots on the ground, dealing with contractors if necessary, stopping in, checking on the buildings, visiting with the users of the buildings, and just making sure everything is operating correctly. I've taken over running the buildings with the building control software that we have. I've had a few trainings. I've had some consultants coming in, helping with that, and have a pretty good handle on that. So I think, I think we are comfortable with where we're at, and moving forward with keeping that as the way we're going to run the department. So that is basically the biggest line on the facilities. If we move on to, let's say, public works, that's pretty much a straight, just some salary increases. Nothing too special in that department. Nothing too different than the previous year. Highway, I'm just going through my notes right here. Highways is pretty much the same, kind of level funded with just some increases to salaries. See, snow, biggest thing in snow is it's pretty much the same. I think we just went up with a little bit of the salaries and overtime costs in snow. Mechanic, same, pretty much same budget with the mechanic, except for there's an increase in fuel costs. So we put that in there. Next up is cemetery. Cemetery, this is in replacing, without replacing Mark, Pete and I kind of got together. We thought the best way forward is to put out another position out in the crew, another laborer for the town. This position would be primarily in the cemetery, but would move from cemetery, parks, and of course, obviously we're small, so he or she could be in water, or he or she could be in highway. Just another body out in the operations division would be a huge help for us, especially since we are having some issues with seasonal help the last few years, not getting the bodies that we used to have. So having this position out in the crew it would be great, and that would be the replacement for Mark. Little bit more in the overtime wages because there would be another position there. So I've factored in a little bit more OT for the cemetery as well. And on to sanitation, waste, recycling, landfill. Basically, the biggest difference here is we've had some very favorable recycling value, a lot better than, we're in better shape than the previous years. So I was able to reduce some of the recycling costs, the extra costs that we were paying to get rid of the recycling. And I think I've pretty much divided it in half. So I'm funding about 50% of what we did last year. So that's the biggest savings in sanitation. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has up to this point. Parks is pretty much straight across the board except for some salaries. And then what we got now? I think that was it for general DPW.
When do we renegotiate Casella again? When's that contract up?
Casella is 2026.
Huh.
We got some stability there.
Yep. And Does anybody have any questions in the general public works section?
Just a general question in terms of you mentioned the joke about snow, but I see signs everywhere for looking for plow people. How are we doing on that? Do we have enough? You said you're short resources. Are you?
Yep.
You feel like your department is short resources right now?
Great question. We had to. They're tough everywhere around. Like Billy, correct. Every other town, I believe, Mass DOT, cities. Everybody's struggling with plow drivers. We did have to increase our rates to be a little bit more marketable, favorable. But by doing so, the small amount of increase that we made, we were able to land the contractors we need this year. So we are one short because we just had a recent employee retire, actually yesterday. So we are short one truck, but we were able to get another one for just this storm, just because it was they've kind of committed to the large storms. They can come in. Smaller storms, they're not available. They run a construction company, so days like this, they're shut down. They can come over and help, but the smaller storms, they'll continue to work. So, but we're in good shape. This storm will be challenging just because of the intensity. A lot of snow in a short period of time. So, but other than that, we're in good shape.
Tim, thank you for thank you for that.
Can I make a general comment on snow and ice also? Just so everyone is aware, you'll notice that the operating costs with snow and ice, they don't really change, and that's by design. In Massachusetts, snow and ice funding is one thing that you can deficit spend against. So you don't need to, you can always deficit spend it unless you budget less than years prior. So typically towns and cities will carry the same budget for a few years, and then they'll level up a little bit, and then they'll carry that for a few years. And if you have a particularly bad winter, you can spend over your budget, which normally you wouldn't be able to do, but then you can essentially pay yourself back that amount over 3 years following. So snow and ice is something that you won't typically see major increases in, even if the operation is projected to be an increase. You don't want to budget too much into it because you never know what winter is going to hold. But just so you are all aware of that. Anything else on public works, or should we move into water?
Actually, I do want to just say, now that I'm looking at that slide, Alex, I did miss one in mechanic. There is an increase in OT because we have previously taken our existing underground storage tanks offline and using Wenham for the last year and a half. Talking with our public safety divisions as well as Alex and Joe, we decided to bring our fuel tanks back online for a period of time until we can figure out where the town hall project is going and the kind of the timeline on that. So because we're going to bring them back online, we haven't yet, but plan to in the next month or two. We do have to compensate, and DEP requires us to, because they're underground tanks, they're single wall, and there's no leak detection. They require us to do a daily fuel reconciliation report, which requires our mechanic to come in each weekend, Saturday and Sunday, every day pretty much, to do that fuel reconciliation reporting. Similar to the way we had it before when the tanks were online. So that is just the biggest in vehicle maintenance. That is personal expenses. That is why it's up a little bit more than the normal or other departments. So we are still looking forward to trying to get a new fuel facility, trying to make sure that we either join with the town hall project or run that independently. I have a pretty good path forward, trying to get some pricing. Originally, we thought, and I think we'll get into with capital, I think we thought it was going to be upwards of close to $1 million for a facility. I have been able to have some conversation with some local towns, some other municipalities. There are other ways to purchase this that I'm exploring through different contracts. So in doing so, if I'm successful with that, there could be a considerable savings in the cost. Still going to be expensive, but there could be a 30% reduction in cost, something like that. estimate.
I'd just like to add to that. We are moving forward in a direction right now, but Wenham has expressed an interest in continuing to look at the possibility of sharing new fuel pumps down the road. They need to replace theirs as well. They understand and actually, I think, agree with us that the iron rails is not the right location if we're going to share. It's not well situated to serve both communities well. So we're going to continue talking to them while Tim tries to figure out the best, cheapest way to get new tanks. We'll continue to talk to them, see if there's someplace else that we can do it. But the iron rails just was not the location. So,
Tim, is there a timeline on when you'll have to make, excuse me, when you'll be forced to make a decision on which way to go? I mean, are you following a timeline? Are there regulations or rules that apply?
There's no rules to, I think the EPA mandated removal of steel tanks a few years ago, single wall steel tanks. They have not mandated removal of fiberglass tanks to this point, but our tanks are probably 30 years old, approaching 30 years old. So there could be, and I'm confirming, but we are potentially paying a premium for insurance on those tanks because of the age. There's always that life cycle, and there could be even a life on those tanks, or preferred lifespan. I'm still doing some research on that, working with our new mechanic to try to find out some of the details on those tanks. But we're not mandated to remove them, but it's probably in our best interest to have them out of the ground before we have an issue that costs a considerable amount more money. So,
okay, thank you.
I don't know if this is for Joe or for Tim, but the question of electric vehicles, does that play a role in this in any way? And what vehicles might go electric in the nearer future?
I think it's a longer range. I think it's a longer range planning thing. The types of vehicles that we could get now. And I actually agree with you. I think we should probably be looking to make some investment in electric vehicle infrastructure here. I'd like to see that be a goal for FY24. At the same time, so much of what's available right now doesn't help us. Most of our vehicles are big, heavy duty vehicles. We have the cruisers. I'm sure the chief, I've actually talked to the chief a couple times about starting to transition some of the police fleet over. But once you get past cruisers, everything's kind of heavier duty, and the ability of those electric versions to stand up and last as long as we use them, that I'm not sure it's been proven yet. So we're going to continue to look at it. I agree with you, Nick. I think we should start to plan for bringing in some electric vehicles. It'll help with fuel costs. Will help with the environment. We just need to make sure that we're investing in vehicles that will give us the same life as the ones that we're currently using, because we don't want to buy a more expensive vehicle and have to replace it more frequently. So
but my real thought was, if we're moving in that direction societally, it's going to be a 20 to 30 year transition. How does that play into the fuel tanks? And maybe it makes a lot more sense to be in a shared situation than going alone. That's what I'm just thinking.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that a lot of our machinery is heavy equipment. 20 to 30 years from now, if we do go that direction, the tanks that we put in probably tomorrow may be needing to be replaced by that time. So there's quite a long period of time there. Seems like a lot of what's available to us now, for the police chief, for the cruisers, they're all hybrids. They're not full electric. So they still do require fuel. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of what we see out there is a hybrid, not a full electrical vehicle.
Yeah, I really don't want to be the first town on the North Shore to put all of our police officers in Teslas. So let's move on to water, if everybody is set with Public Works.
Water is actually pretty straight across. Some salary increases. Largest or the difference this year is we usually fund in capital. We usually fund $15,000 for each hydrant replacements and meters. we decided to combine that into a $30,000 capital, but put that into our operating expenses instead of a capital request. So that's something that we need yearly to replace meters, parts, hydrants, valves, whatever we need, and we go through that budget pretty much yearly. But if not, I think it's better served in the operating than on a capital budget. So that's the only real difference in water this year as compared to last, besides, like I said, some salary increases.
One quick question just from the fund balance. I wasn't quite sure why the balance went up in FY22. I don't know if that's
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Tim and I have been meeting over discussing this, and that's because the retained earnings used to fund the enterprise were not needed last year. And so how it went up was because the anticipated use of this 242,000 was actually not needed. Excuse me, the
327.
227. There you go. Sorry.
so effectively, once you put the FY21 actuals, that will then show the
Correct. Yeah.
increase in balance. Okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
And just so we're all, just so everyone is aware, for our financial policies dictate that we retain a floor of 20% of the operating value, the total fund balance. 20% needs to be sort of held onto as cash in the retained earnings account. Anything over that can be sort of like used to charge indirect costs, that sort of thing, to fund the operation. And then so we will, as everyone is aware, if we need to make rate adjustments, Tim and I will work together on that, and then bring that with Joe to the board of selectmen, who is our water commissioners in town, and discuss that. And then so the water enterprise, essentially, when we if that number, the retained earnings and the fund balance, starts sliding back, then we will look at the water rate. And we'll have to increase that to make sure that the operation can be successfully funded in any given year.
Yep, I'll have a better idea if that would be the case after the third quarter, the February bills that are going to be issued very shortly. Once we get the collection from those bills, I'll have a better idea of where we're at for the last billing cycle for the year.
Great, thank you.
All right. I think
May I
just
ask Tim, we had spoken a while back in FinCom about using not the water usage rates, but there's another aspect of billing. I forget what it is.
The infrastructure fee.
Right. We talked about setting that aside for capital.
We're still tracking that way. The infrastructure fees collected, I think what we mentioned would try to offset the debt service from the large capital projects that we've had in the past. That's still how we're still trending that way. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
No one else? Okay. Thank you, Tim. Good luck the next 30 hours or so, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, police. Chief, there you are. How are we doing this morning? Okay, I'm going to just hand this off to you, Russ.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone. To start with, under the police department, just to give everyone a frame of reference, we have 14 full-time police officers. We are down to 5 part-time police officers, and we'll probably end up being down to 3 part-time police officers by July, and I'll explain why I'm talking about this in a second. So when it comes to part-time police officers offset our full-time officers. We allow them to fill in. They're paid at a much lower rate. It's a non-overtime rate. With the new police reform law that came out, all part-time officers have to be trained and go to a full-time academy. So as a result of going to full-time academy, a lot of our part-time officers no longer want to do the job anymore because they can't leave their full-time jobs to go to a full-time academy to be a part-time officer. So why do I say this? This is next year. I'm looking at it now. We're going to study it for a year. But I think we're going to see an uptick in some of our overtime usage because I'm not going to have the part-timers to offset that. And I just want to put a bug in everyone's ear that we're going to have to look at that moving forward. And it's not something that's going to be a huge driver, but it is going to be a driver as it pertains to overtime moving forward. So again, as a frame of reference, we have part-time officers, and part-time officers go through a part-time police academy. It's not the same as a full-time police academy. With the law has changed now, even your part-time officers have to go to a full-time academy. And that's all over the state, and all over the state, all the chiefs are feeling that same crunch. A lot of your part-time officers are just leaving, and that puts more pressure on the full-time officers. So that's something we're going to take a look at moving forward. And and Nick brought up about vehicles. So we now have 2 hybrid vehicles right now that we're running. One is really good, and one has been down more than it's been up. So I'm kind of up in the air about hybrids right now. Topsfield Police Department has a full electric car that they're running right now. So we're going to watch Topsfield and see how they make out. So Topsfield's 100% electric. Ford makes it. So we're watching that right now. And, we're going to give it, it's been in operation for about 6 months. We're going to give it about a year and see how that looks for them. So I wanted to answer what Nick brought up there as well. So some of the stuff that we're looking at, the personnel expenses, it shows a 0.60 increase, $10,000. That's your contractual raises that we have. We have 14 officers. We've lost, through retirements, we've had a lot of your senior officers retire and a lot of junior, lower the officers we don't pay at the same rate. So that's where you come up with your $10,000 difference right there. The operating expenses, my operating expenses, there's an $8,441 increase. That's a one-time purchase that's in this budget. We're replacing our firearms this year. Our firearms are going on 12 years old and they need to be replaced. So the cost to replace all the firearms is $8,500. So I went up $8,400. I actually went down in my operating costs if I took out that $8,500 one-time purchase. So you see that here, but that won't be there next year. Originally, it was in capital. When I put it in the capital plan 4 years ago, it was decided that it's a one-time purchase under 10,000. We're going to put in operating. So you'll see that that's where the operating increase, the increase in my operating, the driver in my operating expenses comes from. You mentioned grants. So this year so far in grants, we were able to, we petitioned the state for 2 separate grants for body-worn cameras. We're going to be doing a body-worn camera program. We got almost $55,000 in body-worn camera grants from the state. And so, I wish we had it. We've been awful busy lately. As most of you probably know, we had quite an incident on Railroad Ave a week ago today. That would have been great to have on body-worn camera because it was textbook. I am tickled pink about our officers and our dispatchers. And if you listen to the tapes and you heard all this go down, you would be as equally as proud as I am. So the body-worn camera program, we got $55,000 in grants for that. And we got about $2,800 in pedestrian safety grants as well from the state for the grant end of it. My total police department expenses, the change was roughly 1%. And so the firearm under the budget drive is the firearm replacement cycle. That's a one-time purchase. And my overtime expenses, my overtime is being driven up because I'm losing my reserves. I'm down to 5. I have 1 that's going to be leaving coming up in 3 months. That'll give me 4. And then I'll have 1 that's going to leave in July. And that's going to bring me down to 3 part-time people. And when I lose part-timers, it just drives my full-timers backfill themselves now, but backfill for full-timers, and they're paid at a much higher rate. Questions so far? David, I can always count on you for a good question. I'm going to be disappointed, David.
Russ, I do have a question, and because of all this shift in personnel, that's what's really leveling off the personnel expenses for right now.
Yes.
Are you and I think I'm just sort of anticipating the future. It sounds like this is going to jump a bit in the next couple of years. So, full-time officers coming in, overtime, and people maturing in position.
So without a doubt, because you have a lot of everyone, you go up a pay step depending on where you are on the pay scale. My fear, honestly, not my fear, what I predict is going to happen, there are a lot of departments that are putting on full-time personnel as a lieu of, right now, in lieu of losing part-time personnel. I would rather take a year, step back and look at it and see what, it's hard for me to predict what's going to happen. I can kind of roll the dice and see what's going to happen, Nick, but I don't want to come to you and say, I anticipate this is going to happen. I want to wait and come to you with solid numbers. As a result of losing all these reserves, this is what drove this number. When that time comes, Nick, then you being my liaison, you know we're going to have conversations about this is where I see the trend is. But I just need more time to look at it to make sure it's going to happen that way. Not that I'm guessing it's going to happen. It doesn't turn out that way. But yes, Nick, in the long run, I mean, we have 14 full-time officers. The highest we've ever had at Hamilton PD was in 2007. We had 15 back then, and we have 14 now. So I do predict with the loss of the part-timers, that's where we are going to go. All these, we're not feeling it as bad as some of these departments out in Western Mass who really use full part-timers. We're one of those departments that are cuspers. We don't use a lot of our part-timers, but deep replace 50% of our sick time goes to part-time help. Backfill on holidays, always on a holiday, I run one full-time and one part-time officer. We start losing those and I have to pay someone to work on the holiday, they get holiday pay. So it's going to ratchet up my overall personnel expenses.
Thank you.
So, Chief, this is Bill. So I just want to acknowledge, I mean, we're talking numbers here, but in terms of culture in your department, as you transition to new people, I just want to recognize you're doing a great job because the new people that come in and the change, it's a consistent, your staff is very consistent and they've all been pleasurable to deal with and have the best interest of the town in mind. So thank you for, as you transition your force, to have a consistent message and a consistent support of our community. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, Bill. And I will say we are very particular about the people that work in this town. We are a community-oriented police department, and I've spoken to Joe. I'll be coming before the board. I'm very proud of one of my officers whose son has autism. He just started an autism awareness outreach program, working with the schools, we actually invited Wenham to take part of it. And he's going door to door. You know, he's meeting with parents, going door to door. He has a huge background on this and he's very passionate about it. One of the other officers is working on the Silver Alert program to work with the new COA director for our seniors in town. I've got one officer he's focusing on grants, trying to see what kind of monies we can get for our department. I'm very proud of the department. I will say that incident that we had on Railroad Ave a week ago today, our police department, our dispatchers, our fire departments, our ambulance crew, it was textbook. You couldn't have asked for a bad scenario, but a better response. You know, we don't get a lot of the crimes that a lot of these other towns do, but we still get them. And it's nice to know that everyone responds and knows what to do when that button gets pushed, because that was a horrific crime.
Can you share what, I feel in the dark, I may be the only one, but what happened?
We had well, by statutes, an attempted murder on Railroad Ave the other day at one of the homes. Involved two relatives with a person was stabbed several times. And I'll talk to you offline, Nick, but it was a horrific scene that everyone did very well at.
Okay.
Our B&Es have been up a little, and I know this is not the time to talk about. When I get the chance to talk to the department, we've had a lot of motor vehicle B&Es for the last year. Our solve rate is at 100%. B&Es into homes, our solve rate's at 100%. So when you have B&Es into residents and you can get the perpetrator, you get the belongings back, that's a home run. You know, we've been doing very well in those areas. Elderly scams are up, and you're going to see now we're going into that year of IRS scams. So, you know, people starting to get the tax returns back. You'll see IRS scams. There'll be an uptick in IRS scams now too. So we've been busy as a small department. We've been busy.
I have a question.
Please, Rosie.
So in terms of the full-time training, I understand that that's a mandate now. So tell me what the cost is, how long the training is, and then, for instance, for the part-timers, who pays? Does the department pay, or are the officers required to pay themselves?
Okay, good question, Rosie. So if I want to hire a full-time officer now, a part-time officer, I would have to hire them as a part-time officer, then I would have to pay and send them to a full-time academy. So the full-time academy itself, just the academy cost is only about $3,000. But I end up paying his or her salary, and that's the problem. There's a question of what some police departments don't pay the salary, they have to go on their own. But if they get hurt while they're there, who's liable then? So the cost of the academy is one thing. Now, if I hire a full-time officer, the same thing, I still pay the $3,000. They're a full-time employee of the town, so I have to pay the salary and the fringe. But then they come back and they work for the department. If I have to pay a part-time officer and send them to the full-time academy, and then they're on my part-time list, most part-timers who want to go to the full-time academy, they're just waiting for another town to open up and scoop them up. Once they're certified and trained as a full-time officer, as a part-time here, they're going to try to go to any other town that has an opening, and will be more like a stepping stone. You know, in the past, it never happened here in Hamilton. I had reserve officers, and reserve officers are trained up, and I would hire off the reserve officer list for the full-timers. It doesn't work like that anymore. There's the part-timers that get on, that they're young officers, part-time officers that want to be full-time officers. If I send them to the full-time academy, I've got to pay for that. And then as soon as a full-time opening comes up somewhere else, they're going to leave. And that's what's happening with one of my part-timers now. He's self-sponsored himself. That means he's sending himself to the academy, and he's already looking at another full-time job, or a full-time job that opened up in a neighboring town. So he will never come back here. He'll leave here and he'll go over there most likely.
And
Russ,
is it a one-time expense? Is it a one-time expense to send them to the academy, or is it yearly? I just don't. I don't understand.
Yep. So it's okay. So it's a one-time expense to send them to the full-time academy, but every officer has to receive a minimum of 40 hours in service training. So whether you're full-time or part-time, they have to go to full-time. They have to go to in-service training. So we have to budget for that. So basically, it's 40 hours for every officer to go to in-service training. It's the mandated training to keep their certifications up. So that includes anything from CPR, first aid, firearms training, legal updates training, bias, police training. It's whatever the state mandates for that particular year. So we do have to pay. That's a continuous cost. Every year we budget for that for every officer, 40 hours after their initial academy training.
Thank you, Russ.
Russ, I have a question. Is it possible to put together, say, an IMA for Wenham to show them that we are willing to merge with them? And then I was wondering, could we do it with just one police officer? Because I know they had the same training issue. They're concerned about their part-timers. Is there any way we could start, say, a pilot type program with just even sharing one officer and see how that goes? Does that make sense?
So, I mean, that's interesting. I never thought of it, but not the problem. I don't want to say there's a problem before there's a problem. So if we're talking about one full-time officer and we pay 50%, they pay 50%, that means they patrol in our town 50% and patrol in their town 50%. And we would we would split the fringe benefits. That would be like having a full-time reserve. The only thing would be when they're going to be answering to two different towns, two different regimes, two different departments who operate in two different ways, with two different firearms, with two different uniforms, two different sets of policy and procedures. I'll definitely look at it, and I'll do the T model, the pluses and the minuses. I don't have any problem. I'll look at anything. I've always, and as you know, I have no problem talking about merging police departments. I've always been a supporter of the merging of the two police departments.
Right, because it seems like Wenham's experiencing the same issue, and it falls along the same line as our inspectional services and our all these other entrepreneurial initiatives. So I thought, well, maybe if we could create a new way of thinking about it, it might be the beginning of something that can add value to both towns.
I'd love to see that. And maybe, you know, and I think Joe alluded to it, maybe when things settle down a little, when we know who the permanent is over there, and the
Yep.
chief is fairly new, and now we have Tom back as the interim, who was great to work with. You know, that I'd be more than happy to have conversations with anyone in regards to something like that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions? If not, I'll go on to ECO. All right. So ECO, we see a personal expense. You see a personal expense increase of $7,180. We recently had a well, that's contractual raises in there. We also have a full-time dispatcher that has recently resigned. So we're going to be replacing that one. So hopefully we'll see a reduction next fiscal year, because he was a high-end dispatcher, paid at more the top of the scale, and we'll be hiring at a lower end. And Michelle from Human Resources, she also sat in to do one of the interviews on that, and I appreciate that. And I added to the budget here $1,300 for training. So the state provides, you talk about grants. So we petitioned the state and received about $40,000 in grants from state 911. But the state limits us on how much they'll give us for training now. So I put the $1,300 in the budget for training for my new dispatcher that's going to be coming on board to get these certain initial training that the state won't cover, that we have to cover. So it's one of those unfunded mandates. In order to be a dispatcher, you have to have these certain schools. If you don't have these certain schools, you cannot sit the console. So like I said, we're just shy of $40,000 in grant money from our ECO. We're always trying to court other towns. Joe's worked hard with that, talking with other towns, trying to get other towns to come on board. I keep on hearing other towns, they're looking at merging with other dispatch agencies. We're usually quick to get on the phone, either Joe or myself, to call the town manager or that respective chief to see if they're interested. But you know, over the years, I've heard some of these other towns where we're looking to merge, but no one makes a move. I haven't seen, since the initial merger of dispatch in Middleton, I haven't seen any town really make a move. They talk about it, and we entertain them, we bring them here, I'll give them the tours, but none of the other towns have ever pushed the button that I've seen so far. So I'm more than happy we have a great dispatch center. It's built for 3 towns even. We have 3 consoles. You know, we could definitely take, 2 more towns relatively our size without a problem. You know, just trying to find those towns. And that was the increase in dispatch.
Yeah, if I could just add to what Russ is saying about other towns, that in the past year, we'd heard that 2 other neighboring towns that were making noise about wanting to do regional dispatch. One of them wanted to go join the, actually, I think they both had talked about joining up in Middleton. And we reached out to both of those, but by the time we had, and I don't know how it got started in each community, but by the time we had reached out to them in both towns, in both cases, public sentiment started to build against going regional. The residents in those towns had started to voice their opinion that they wanted them to stay on their own. So we had, plus if we were to join, if somebody were to join us, there'd be some cost to them. It would reduce what they pay on their own, but there'd still be some cost. Right now, the Middleton Central Dispatch, the REC is trying to woo people over by saying that there'd be no cost for them. They're trying to bring them in for free. So we're trying to compete against free. So we're still having those conversations, still talking to people. One of my sales pitches to the town administrators in the other towns is, hey, your folks are against joining the big regional dispatch up in Middleton because it's so far away. We're right next door. Yes, there's a little bit of a cost if you come to us, but it's less than you're paying now, and it might not be so scary to your residents. So we'll see if that shakes out anything, but we'll continue to have those conversations. So.
I have a question for we've been doing this, we've been looking, we've lost Wenham a while ago, and Wenham was paying something to us for contractual obligations. Has that number, do they continue to pay us or no?
No, they have to pay their portion of the retirement for the employees that were working here at that time, but they do not pay anything directly to the town.
Okay, and then the other question has to do with, we've talked about people coming in. Would it be any savings for us to leave? And I know I know we have a great facility. I know we have got good people there. I'm just wondering what the impact would be if we were going to if we consolidated with somebody else somewhere else.
So there would always be a potential savings in the long run, Nick, after we work out, okay, the questions would be, okay, are we going to man the station, or is the station going dark at night? Are we going to have someone at the window? Like, for example, of course, I mean, hopefully, God forbid, COVID ever happens again, but we hand out the COVID testing kits. With COVID, really having them here, dispatch here, was a home run for us. I wouldn't even know how we would do it if we didn't have dispatch here right now. Between the health nurse running in, because we keep all the vials here, right out in a locked up room off of dispatch. I mean, there's so much going on here right now with dispatch. So right now, if we didn't have dispatch here, it would make it look a little different. But to what you're saying, to your point, in the long run, Nick, yeah, I think we probably would, but I think we would give up services.
Yes.
I will tell you this: if I was to let you listen to this, our dispatcher, and everyone's got good dispatchers, but I was really proud of our dispatcher and the way we responded to this attempted murder. In the long run, yeah, we probably would save, but you're going to give up services.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to give it up, and to Joe's point, every time the town starts talking about it, the town fathers start looking into it, the townspeople push back. And would we have that in our town? I guess we probably would.
Yeah.
So if Nick, if you want to sit down and talk about it, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it.
I'm just curious in terms of what that savings might be, but we're talking about 400,000 roughly, and does that drop to 100,000, or does it drop to 300,000? And it's it's 300,000. What
Our
difference
dispatch
does it
is
make?
roughly 370,000 is that's the dispatch budget. Would it drop? I guarantee it would drop. What it would look like, I could do the back of the envelope math. Like I said, are we going to hire someone to work the window? Are we going to line both the buildings? What I'd have to really map out what does it look like for us, talk to the fire chief. How does it impact you? Do you have to hire? So it'd take me a little more, Nick, but in the long run, would it save something? Yes. I just don't know how much.
Just a thought. Thank you.
Nick, and you going to get an electric bike now?
No.
Well, folks, anything for me?
Thanks a lot for your time, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Chief. Next up will be Fire Chief Ray Burnett, talking about the fire department budget. Chief?
Hi, how you guys all doing this morning? I'm glad you guys all nice and warm. It's pretty blustery out there, and I've been out. We've had a few calls this morning. I've had quite a few residents call, ask, make sure we were going to open up a shelter if we lost power for any length of time, and I've planned to do so. Got people on backup on staff to open up the shelter in case we lose power, and I'm hoping we're not going to, but I just wanted to let you know that that's the case, and we'd be up and running if we did. I have to say, I was shocked. I thought the sun was going to come out after Russ and Tim, their lengthy presentations. I thought that the storm would be over by then, but it hasn't. I just want to say that the fire department has 5 full-time employees, including myself, and 28 part-time employees. So the fire department has one of the largest employee pools, and I believe we run most efficient in try and keep the budget as low as we can. Some of the driving forces this year raised the budget up a little bit was salaries. There were several different reasons why salaries went up. Some of that was due to COLA for the call personnel and myself, step raises, And we also had quite a few of the firefighters get their EMTs, and I had to also incorporate monies aside for them to for their training. Each year they have to do 24 hours of training to stay current with their EMTs. We grew the EMT roster by 6, and that was one of the other driving forces that brought the salary budget up. Also, we had to enhance our stipend for overnight coverage. We needed to person. Currently, there are 2 people from o'clock in the afternoon until 7 o'clock in the morning to make sure that we have adequate coverage for EMT calls, fire calls. And normally we get an influx of people that show up to the calls. But in order to make sure that we kept level service and make sure we had an adequate staffing for these calls, I had to add another person to the night coverage, which costs $25 a night. So for that large period of time, for 375 days a year, it costs $25 extra a night to cover that stipend. So that's what had the driving forces of the added $10,426. On the operating side of it, we had several different factors, and some of it was due to COVID, because of the increases. PPE, the actual fire gear that PPE is personal protective equipment, which is actually the fire gear that we wear, went up drastically in cost due to the added supply chain problems and whatnot. Another driving factor was our reporting software. A company bought them out, who we've had with this firehouse, we've had them for years. ESO is the name of the company, bought them out. Of course, when they bought them out, they changed the format. We're going to the cloud, and it cost quite a bit more, which added significantly to the operating budgets. And basically, that's it in a nutshell. My increase is 1.77. Slightly more than some of the other budgets, but I don't think it was that bad. Anybody have any questions for me?
One other thing I want to point out, Ray, is fuel costs. You guys are one of our bigger consumers of fuel, and that sort of helped drive the your operating costs up as well. I didn't put that in the presentation, but that is a consideration. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I had it down on the list, but I guess I missed that one on my my bullet point. Yeah, I mean, I think Alex lowered the amount of fuel overall that was per gallons, but also the cost of the fuel has gone up quite a bit. And I think that's the driving force to quite a few of the budgets, trying to budget for that increase.
Is this capital line included in the overall capital line, or is it separate?
Just separate. These are previous capital purchases that are budgeted out. So this is mostly a fire truck. It's your pumper truck.
It was a pumper truck and
squad
it was a
truck.
squad.
Yep.
Ray, could you tell us what proportion of your calls are fire versus medical?
So it's actually going the other way. Medical calls are actually higher than fire calls now, and I see that predominantly increasing as our population seems to be on the higher end of the aging. I really see that increasing. Another, like I said, another driving factor to the salaries was EMTs. And in contrast to that, we also have we're actually going for a non-transporting ambulance license, which is a small portion of the expense money that's added to it. Right now, we're currently using Beauport Ambulance Service, which does an excellent job. But with staffing problems that they're seeing and other factors, I think eventually we're going to have to look towards going back to our own ambulance or augmenting them with our own ambulance. And maybe that's 3, 4, 5 years down the road. But I am diligently working towards that because I don't want to be blindsided. I don't want the town to be blindsided. So I'm doing, everything possible to research that for our future.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other fire questions? Should we move on?
Just a comment, Mrs. Rosie Gray, thank you so much for all you do for our town in so many ways. I think you make such a concerted effort to keep the expenses low, and we certainly get bang for our buck. So thank you so much.
I appreciate your comments.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chief. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh, it's going to be busy, I think. Unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
So,
All right. Bye now.
bye.
All right. Public Health, Joe, I'll hand this back to you.
Yeah, and we've got Dennis Palazzo, the new health director, on. He can answer some questions at the end, but the next couple of slides are going to be budgets that we have relatively new directors. Dennis joined us in November as the health director. You'll all remember that last year we did a minor reorganization of the department and created the director of public health position on a part-time basis. We were able, after a long search, to identify Dennis, and he's been working since November in that role. We also finally were able to add some part-time clerical back into that budget. So the budget for FY23 is much the same. We've added some funds for consulting services. Again, this is a department, probably the only department we have in town that has no full-time employees. We have a part-time clerk, part-time public health nurse, part-time animal control officer, and a part-time director. We're making improvements. We're making progress in kind of helping this department. Part of that is with what we did last year. Part of that is also with the public health, Department of Public Health grant that we received in June of last year. That is giving us some additional assistance through a regional public health nurse and and eventually a regional public health social worker. We have hired the regional public health nurse. Unfortunately, we hired from within. We elevated, very fortunately for all of us, Rachel Lee from our public health nurse position in Hamilton to the regional public health nurse. So she is now working full-time for 4 communities and helping us kind of collaborate and find ways to be more efficient and make sure we close gaps in our systems. But she's no longer dedicated just to Hamilton. We're in search for a public health nurse right now. And we're confident that with Dennis and Rachel in place, we'll be able to find somebody that will be able to kind of pick up the local responsibilities and be backstopped by Rachel in her regional role. I don't anticipate any changes in public health in FY23, but this is an area we'll have to continue to monitor and see what it is that we need to do to make sure that we're providing the best services for our residents. I'd like to take an opportunity now, for those of you who haven't already met him, to ask Dennis to turn on his camera and say hello. And if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer it. But keep in mind, Dennis has only been with us since November, so we may have to get back to you. Not 100% sure we'll be able to provide detailed answers right now. Dennis, you there?
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I'm sorry the camera's not working on this particular computer. I was on vacation.
So, Joe or Dennis, could you briefly describe for us what services are currently being provided and what augmented services are being contemplated?
So basically, public health and safety, food inspections, animal inspections. We're streamlining the permitting process for both those, animal keeping and food establishments. Septic inspections are ongoing with Greg, our contractor. Ongoing, I'm going to institute a educational process for our food establishments. Quite frankly, they're not up to the level that I expect. As far as pool inspections, we don't have any of those yet because we're in the middle of of winter right now. But those will be upcoming. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so COVID compliance has unfortunately taken up 90% of the department's resources. Complaints are coming in fast and furious each day about COVID compliance. Each one of those complaints needs to be investigated and report written and then logged in and out. Other than that, we're looking at the light at the end of the tunnel at the end of this pandemic, hopefully, and on the other side, working towards better servicing the community through food, housing, pests, basically all the environmental health concerns. I hope that answered your question.
I can add a little bit to it too, if you don't mind, David. So part of the expectation here with the regional public health positions is that Rachel and the eventually hired regional public health social worker will be able to identify areas where we're lacking, not just in Hamilton, but across the 4 communities, and hopefully find regional solutions to those things so that if we do have to make investments, we're making them in a shared environment with the other communities so that we can meet those needs and not just drive our own budget costs up. So we're just at the start of that. Rachel just stepped into the regional role at the beginning of January, and we expect to have more as she starts to conduct meetings with the key health folks in each of the 4 communities and continues meeting with the state. And, that's why we're not really anticipating any additional investment in this area this year, but there may be something down the road. That help?
Another ongoing responsibility of the health department is to assist the Board of Health. And that's an ongoing responsibility that Dennis and the other staff are assisting with.
Dennis or Joe, can you explain what consultative services we use in addition to our full-time or part-time people?
So we call all our contractors consultants, the septic inspector, the animal control officer, pool, food, whatnot. We do have a consultant for the department itself, who's very knowledgeable and very well credentialed and educated, if you will. But those are what we call consultants.
Thank you.
Joe, is there an intention to make these expanded services known to the public somehow?
Of course, yes. We'll we've been trying to make the public health staff more visible. One of the efforts towards that is we'll be moving them very shortly down the street from the town hall to the Council on Aging, where we also have emergency management services or emergency public health services already in the trailer and back. We'll have the regular staff in offices upstairs. Part of that has been done because throughout the pandemic, one of the things we've learned is that the demographic of the community, the piece of the community that most needs public health services, is also the portion of our community that we serve with through the Council on Aging. So a collaborative effort between the new Council on Aging director and the kind of reimagined health folks will serve that part of the community much better. And our goal is always to kind of communicate what we can do for our residents. So I know Dennis has talked at length about making the public health website page on the town website easier to use and more functional, and use it to provide more information out to the community. So yeah, we're embarking on a new phase of public health service in the town of Hamilton. So
thank you.
If I might, Joe, there really was no health department to speak of prior to my entrance into the town, and thank you all for welcoming me. we're actually trying to build a department now. We're trying to make it functional. As Joe said, the website is more informational than functional. We'd rather have people go to the website and be able to process items and log complaints and whatnot. As far as the permitting process, we're trying to streamline that because that really wasn't user friendly as well. There's several items that we're trying to implement variance applications, whatnot, really weren't up to par, if you will. And we're trying to, well, if you will, we're trying to make this a real department, and we're trying to build out a department so it's user friendly and service the community and something that we can monitor public health and safety.
Thank you.
Okay. Should we?
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, should we move on to COA? Teresa, are you? There we are.
Yeah, I'll start here as well. So this is another department that has a new director. Teresa started with us in December. Teresa Woodbury can turn on her camera and be introduced. We were fortunate to be able to hire Teresa in December away from another community. She has a long and very well regarded career already in the Council on Aging field. She was the director in West Newbury for a number of years and comes to us with a lot of experience, and she's jumped in with both feet. We were able to develop this budget with her assistance. We had kind of carried a bunch of numbers forward, and then we had her review it and make sure that she felt comfortable with it. So while she wasn't here at the beginning of the budget process, she was able to look it over with us and provide us with some assistance in that regard. I will let Teresa introduce herself, and if you have questions, we will again do our best to answer, given that she's only been on board for about a month and a half. Teresa?
Hey everyone, so I'm Teresa Woodbury. I started December 20th. Like Joe mentioned, I came from West Newbury with 16 and a half years of experience. Just a little about myself. I'm Massachusetts Council on Aging Director Certified. Very excited to be here. Tim Morris and I, who's the outreach director or outreach coordinator at the Council on Aging, have really started looking into getting more programming started, starting in March and April, when we can hopefully move things kind of outside, pending that our numbers are going down. So some of the things that we're looking at is getting a yoga class in there, having more presentations, getting some department heads in there to let the residents know what services are available. We have spoken with Lieutenant Janes, and he's coming in and doing a presentation. I've been meeting with Lieutenant Janes about the silver alert, which Chief Stevens had mentioned. So we have a lot of fun things. We're really jumping in feet first, like Joe mentioned, to get things going. Any questions?
Teresa, have you seen, you must have seen an increase in participation since you've come on board?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the numbers were before, but things have been, really bustling. People are coming and going. Mornings tend to be very quiet. So I'm hoping to get some activities in there in the mornings. And that's really kind of what we're focusing on. But, our numbers are great. I'm excited to see that the high COVID numbers haven't kept people away.
Good. That's great. Thank you.
If I could just add here, the last year in the Council on Aging and the Senior Center have been kind of quite tumultuous. I'm glad that we're finally moving in a very positive direction to kind of bring that to a close and start off on a new foot. My neighbor is snow plowing, and I can't complain about that because he's snow plowing our shared driveway. So that's going to help me out a lot later on. So I apologize for the background noise. I'll turn off my microphone and just say we're very, very happy to have both Teresa and Tim on board. And we're looking forward to a very, very good end of FY22 and FY23 ahead of us.
Thank you. So one of the other things before we move on, and you'll see it in the March newsletter, which we should hopefully be getting it back the end of February, but I'm implementing 100 cups of coffee. It was very successful in West Newbury. So I'm excited to get it started here in Hamilton. So I'll be looking for community members, residents, business owners to come in, have a cup of coffee with me, have a cup of tea, glass of water, and let me know what ideas they want to see at the senior center, what they can bring to the senior center, volunteering, you know, all those sorts of things. So if anybody wants to schedule a cup of coffee with me, a glass of water, tea, feel free to reach out via email or phone call.
Teresa, I just want to welcome you since I'm the liaison from FinCom and reemphasize, I think we've spoken about it, the need to engage the ever-increasing proportion of our citizens who are classified as senior immediately in terms of the master plan. So I look forward to working with you in that regard.
Yes. Thank you.
I would also like to say it's Rosie as the liaison from the select board that Teresa, you are certainly a welcome addition to the COA. I see renewed life, renewed enthusiasm, and you certainly have revitalized the program. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Teresa. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Okay. All right. So we're going to shift gears looking at the library now. I believe Kim is on, but I'm not sure. So the library is, as you all know, a shared building and program with Wenham. And so, oh, there's Kim. Hi. So maybe I'll just turn it over to you.
Sure. From what you can see there, most of what you're seeing in our increases, actually, it's not really, sorry, apologies, broken down, but most of our increases you'll see are salary. Those are due to our contract obligations with the new CBA with the library employees. I did have a really good meeting with Catherine Harrison, chair of the Wenham Select Board, and Jim Purdy from the Finance Committee in Wenham. We met with KP Law to make sure we were budgeting correctly with what our contract obligations were. So that is correct this year. Our operating costs are down slightly, sort of to make up the difference there. Our biggest savings we're going to see in operating is in our janitorial contract. I've been working with Mike Hardy, the Wenham facilities manager, to look into decreasing some of those costs. And the other big project that we're working on in terms of operating is upgrading our internet connection on the public side. We've had a very small bandwidth from Comcast. It's one of those ridiculous courtesy accounts that they gave out that's never been upgraded. So we need to move to at least a terabyte of speed to provide what our community and our patrons really need when they're doing any kind of internet work. So that reflects in our utility number, but fortunately with the decrease in janitorial, it's sort of a wash. I think, is there any questions I can answer there?
So can I just, Kim, one thing that I want to say. So we're showing the number here is an assessment. And so how the shared service works is the town of Wenham is the lead on this sort of shared program. And so they send us we call it an assessment. And so this includes not only personnel costs, but there's also the fringe benefits that Mr. Wanger is always apt to point out, that they ripple off of those salaries and wages. And so this includes retirement costs, healthcare costs, et cetera. So this covers, this is like a holistic look at costs, not just salaries. So just so we're all aware.
Alex or Joe, this is probably not for Kim. Would you just remind us as to the status of the roof capital investment?
Actually, it is for Kim. Kim or I can answer that question. Again, it's starting to get noisy here. I'll give it to Kim in a minute. The roof is out to bid right now. It was put out to bid with an add deduct, or I mean, with an alt deduct. So the whole roof has been put out to bid for both the library and the recreation center. But if it comes in over what we have put aside, we can deduct out the cost of the flat roof over the recreation building. And I think that's the summation. I'll let Kim talk a little bit more about the details. And I just really quickly add before it gets noisy here again. I think everybody in both communities feels that the library is a huge asset and a resource for our communities. As Alex said, we see it in our budget largely as an assessment from Wenham. The full library budget is available through the town of Wenham. We can get that to you if you want to look at it. And the two FinComs for both Hamilton and Wenham are going to be meeting jointly on Monday night to talk about all of our shared programs, library, recreation, ISD. So some of the details will be available in that meeting if we need them. So I'm going to turn off because it's getting noisy here.
Hi, Kim, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Replacing the roof on the rec building and the library, I know that our energy manager had done a study on municipal solar, and I think we should really be looking at that very closely. Can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that's come up, obviously, we all know with the supply chain costs increasing, we brought in a roofing architect. Vicky Missoni has been writing our RFP, and she's been wonderful. And she's also managing the solar energy part of it as well. So she, at her suggestion, we brought in a roofing architect. I had never heard of one before, but he's been very insightful in looking at the roof and really digging deep into what the needs were there. So the costs on the flat roof, the roof over the rec center, or it's sort of a shared roof as well, but those costs increased dramatically when he took a look at it based on what we had for estimates when we originally did the capital request. So that's why we're putting the shingle roof as the priority. And if we can afford it, we'll do the rec. It may not be cost effective to do both. And I believe Vicky said if we were to put solar panels on that roof without doing any sort of repair work, we would have to take the panels off at the cost to the town to do the work later down the road. So that project may be delayed slightly depending on how the bids come in, which we really don't know.
And that was for the rec roof. Okay, great.
It's the flat portion. It covers the majority of the rec and then part of.
So that's going to be coming down the pike, so to speak. And it will have solar at some point. You're
hopefully.
Yes, yes, me too. I hope so. Thank you.
One quick question. The IT, the capital request, the way it's budgeted, is that included in the assessment?
No, this will be a separate item to be fulfilled through capital and sort of sent a separate assessment. It'll be a flat line. There won't be any like benefits that are attached to it. But I think it was about $27,000 was the request. Joe and I are exploring, so as part of the community compact, we're exploring potentially seeking funding through that grant program to help offset this ask. That remains in exploration at the moment.
Okay.
Any other library questions?
I think I have two, simple questions. And you might have said this, maybe I missed it. What are the indirect costs?
I don't have them in front of me, but they are.
Just what are they? What kind of things are they?
They are, so there's Medicare tax, there's health insurance costs, there's post-employment costs, retirement. So they make up, they're usually around 30 to 40% of a total of an employee's like total salary. And then you add like 30 or 40% for indirect costs such as that. And then there's also a 10% administrative fee that Wenham charges to administer the joint program.
And then the state contribution line?
Yep. So
Why
the
is that added
state,
as a cost?
that is something that we receive from the state, but we put it into the programming. So it's we treat it as a cost. We receive funding and we essentially pass it through to Wyndham.
Okay.
So it comes in on the like through a specific line on state aid on the cherry sheets, and then it goes straight to that programming.
Okay. I suppose I've got it.
The library is
Regional.
because of how it's funded from not only is it a joint program, but we receive some state funding as offsets. It's a complex animal, I suppose.
Yeah, okay, I get it. I disagree with accounting in general, but for that kind of thing.
Okay.
That's just me. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Kim, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll shift gears to recreation now. I believe Sean is on the call here. There he is. Hey, Sean.
Hey, guys.
Okay, so I'll just hand this off to you.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward. Just like everyone else, there's increase in salaries due to contractual obligations and step increases. And really, from the operating side, the one big driver is the $3,000 to replace the ceiling fans in the gymnasium. And we're going to be splitting that with money from the revolving fund as well. So the money that we get from user fees or rentals up the gym will be used in pair to help with that cost. So the fans actually, I put that in the budget, I think 2 fiscal years ago, and was taken out or cut due to COVID. So we want to kind of put that back into the budget to get that work done. And other than that, we're pretty straightforward. And, like folks had mentioned, we do have the joint FinCom meeting on Monday. So we can get into more detail with everyone on, line to line items at that meeting. But again, seems like, obviously the increase, the percent change is a little high, but the actual money is pretty low and really, kind of just reflects the increase to replace those fans. So, I'm happy to, answer any questions, and we can go over the revolving fund too on Monday at the joint FinCom meeting. I have that presentation ready to go as well.
Going once. Any questions? No? Yeah, so pretty, like Sean said, pretty straightforward here, just minimal asks. And one thing that Sean is always good at is leaning into the revolving fund where appropriate. And so when there are sort of one-time, like minor capital expenses like this, his practice has been to split them half with operating and half with revolving fund. And I think that's a pretty good practice to continue. So without any questions, maybe we'll transition here. All right, thanks, Sean.
All right, thanks, everyone.
All right, so schools. So you'll see that we have a, this is just a single slide that represents really a massive sort of pool of money that is being requested. We've been meeting, Joe and I have been meeting with the schools, with various other boards as well, sort of in bigger public meetings to discuss sort of the school spending, how to try to rein that in and sort of suppress the spend a little bit. The biggest drivers on the assessment that comes from the regional school district has to do with salaries and sort of some operating expenses. They're looking at a single large, currently a $2 million OPEB contribution, which while we applaud that because it'll offset future obligations, it also does mean that their bottom line has gone up. They're looking to contribute $2 million currently in OPEB. So, for example, if they were to remove that entire $2 million, then it would, drop their number down to almost exactly $20 million. It'd be a reduction in spending on the assessment for the year, et cetera. So they're certainly not going to just wipe that out. But we've asked them consistently to look at ways to reduce their expenditures, and we'll sort of see what they come back with. They're currently considering some form of reduction, I believe, but we won't really know until they are able to sort of certify and finalize their budget at the school committee level. So we're carrying the sort of full ask right now, hopeful that that will be, we'll see at least a little bit of reduction in it. For Essex Aggie, we're seeing not only a slight bump in enrollment, we were told to expect that from their administrators, but also a higher cost in tuition per student. And so that looks like it's a pretty big jump, 13% and 17% on their debt. So the dollars aren't huge there, but they are, it is an increase. And so we won't know until I think late February what that number will look like. We looked at a 10% increase on our budgeted figures, hoping that that will come in lower than that. So I would expect to see the total schools assessment to come down a little bit, but there's not really any way to know how much until some other sort of pieces move into place. And so I can try my best to answer any questions that we have on this, but we don't have a whole lot of sort of local control within the sort of administrative side over the schools, as we all know. So I'll open it up for questions here and do my best to help answer them.
I just want to make actually one comment, which is in addition to the OPEB, which I think the latest proposal was sort of 2 million, which sort of washes through in terms of transferring it into OPEB and then using the E&D. If I'm correct, they're also using $1 million of E&D just to reduce the assessment and reduce operating costs.
Correct.
While it reduces our assessment this year, assuming they're not one-time costs, nothing else changes, and there's going to be year-over-year increases. That's going to add about $700,000 to next year's budget. So that's why I think it's important really to see if they can make further reductions in their actual operating budget before the budget's finalized. I think that's critical really for future years as well, because even if you look at this 4.15% number, that is, and we're getting, Wenham's got a much lower number this year because of the apportionment. The true operational increase is actually much larger than that because it's being subsidized by that $1 million, which is probably not going to be there next year.
Yeah, their actual expense increase is around 11% this year. It sort of is deflated artificially by this E&D, and the excess and deficiency is similar to free cash in that at the end of the year, whatever is left over becomes excess and deficiency. They're allowed to keep, by local rule, 3%. And so they're expecting to use as of now, $3.25 million in excess and deficiency, with $325,000 being contributed to what they're calling extraordinary maintenance. And those are real costs, those are like building fixes, sort of small capital program repairs, that sort of thing. $2 million to OPEB, and then a little less than $1 million to offset sort of other operating costs, like John noted. So, they're in a tough position with rising costs, but like he said, we have really been working hard with them to get them to bring that number down, and it's in a sense it's out of our hands right now, but we continue to work with them. We need to have a good working relationship with the administration, with their school committee, and we're attempting that. Rosie was in the other day at a sort of a chairs meeting where we had some sort of tough discussions, but necessary. It's a continuation of sort of a number of other meetings and venues that we've been a part of. So yeah.
Alex, when you say 11%, Alex, does that include the E&D, the OPEB?
It does.
Yeah, it does.
Without the OPEB, what would it be?
Go ahead, Alex. I'm sorry.
I think it's like around 5 or 6%. I'm not positive.
I think about 6 or so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd just like to add to one of the things that Alex said. We're all working together with the school department and the school committee to try to help them find ways to minimize their expenses and their expense increase annually. We have asked them for an additional decrease. I do want to highlight that in December, when we first met as a 5 boards group, we asked them to make a decrease, and they did. Not quite all of what we asked at the time, and we've asked for some more now. They're considering it. They're working on it. And I'm ever the optimist, and I'm hopeful that we'll see some additional movement, at least a little bit, here in the next week when they finalize their budget on February 10th, I think it is. So again, what we said at the beginning of the meeting is that some of these costs are not set in stone yet. The good news is that we're able to present you a balanced budget that doesn't require an override, even with some of these costs still being in flux. So I'm hopeful for a reduction here. We'll see where it lands.
One of the things, yeah, it's Rosie, I'll just make a quick statement. It was I thought it was a very good meeting, the chairs meeting a few days ago. And one of the things that I think is important to introduce, follow through on, and help to expand are more creative ways of reducing the need for funding. I think traditionally it's been very easy for the schools to just say, we need more money for this, we need more money for this. But this discussion was twofold. First of all, to encourage the school department to think about the needs of the town and think about the issue of a budget holistically and not just us and them. And then the other portion of that was really to encourage the school department to think about using non-financial means, non-financial ways of meeting some of their expenses. And so hopefully with continued discussions, we can introduce that as a baseline way of thinking about the schools. It's not always raising the budget, just as it is in our town. I think Joe helps us to think about very creative ways to not necessarily need an increase in the budget. So I think this is a new concept for them. I think they were very willing to listen, and we'll see where it goes.
Rosie, I'm just curious. So when you say non-financial ways to meet expenses, is there an example? Something?
Yeah. So one of the examples is reaching out to the area colleges for TAs. We have a lot of colleges that have undergrad and grad students looking for certification and looking for placements. Who wouldn't want to be placed in our school system? And so you have bright, energetic, you have educated and motivated young people who are looking for certification that could go beyond the role of just being on a one-to-one for an IEP, but to actually provide some assistance in the classroom. That would certainly save a lot of money for the school system, and it would be a win-win because the student would benefit, the educational facility that they're from would benefit, and our schools would benefit. So I'm not an expert on how that would work, but it's just a method to start thinking about different ways. Another way is, for instance, I was at a Hamilton Wenham Green meeting last Monday, and one of the topics of conversation was the fact that the schools, high schools' energy consumption continues to increase. And so what can we do that's non-financial to help that? My suggestion would be, well, you have lights on 24/7 in that parking lot. Is there a need for that? I mean, we all know by shutting off lights in our houses how much that can contribute to a decrease in energy consumption and hence energy costs. It certainly is a small, I think, in their overall budget. Maybe both of these things are small, but it changes the mindset to thinking about non-traditional ways of enhancing their needs. And so those were two of the things. I also, as a third measure, I talked about, I live in town, I see school buses going by morning and afternoon, half empty with kids. And I thought, and one of the suggestions was increasing carpooling, consolidating school routes. I mean, these are things that are just suggestions, but it hopefully will open up the conversation, open up the thought process to maybe, again, non-traditional means of reducing expenses. So those are some of the examples. The school committee and Eric Tracy seem to really take that into consideration. And again, perhaps my specific suggestions are not the ones that they would choose, but they're examples of how they might do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, has there been any movement on opening up the school agreement, this ancient school agreement that was written before computers were even, because we're not going to change anything until we can start to modify the agreement that will allow us to move forward.
Interestingly enough, I can provide a little bit of an update. I know that I got an email late yesterday afternoon from the school committee chair. The school committee did vote at its most recent meeting to propose a warrant article and both towns warrants for a very minor revision to the school agreement for this year. And I think they're considering wanting to do more later, but for the current year that we're in, they're looking to establish a warrant article that would allow us to at least make some adjustment to the way school committee members are elected, for instance, so that would comport with state law. I see that as it's a small but positive sign. Again, the committee is asking us to work with them on the agreement. We can go through that process, in a collaborative manner and stuff. We can hopefully get them interested in opening up other aspects of the agreement down the road. So maybe it's something that we do a little bit at a time as we continue to feel more comfortable working together. But we just found out about that late yesterday afternoon. I was not able to forward it on to anybody yet, but we'll be talking about that at the select board meeting, and I'm sure with the FinCom, and at least, getting the door cracked open on talking about the regional agreement. So.
And I did raise that at the all chairs meeting a couple days ago. Talking about the regional agreement again.
Yeah, my personal sense is that must be addressed in order for any substantial change to be sort of
otherwise we're going to be in this loop of limbo.
It's very cyclical.
And we may need to convince Wenham first.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Is there any use of a citizen's petition? Would that be of any use at all in asking to open up an agreement or something along that line?
We can look at it, Darcy. I'm not sure it would be anything that would be binding, because the agreement has to be opened by the joint agreement of all three parties, the two towns and the school district. Citizen's petition on our warrant would basically ask us to do what we've already done, which is ask the school department and Wenham to open the agreement. We need Wenham and the school committee to take the same vote. As far as kind of showing that we're kind of united in that request, it would be great as far as supporting what the select board has already done here in Hamilton. But I think functionally, I don't know if it would really move the needle.
And I think one of our big issues right now is the turnover in Wenham. So we can't really get a handle on who's gonna help us with this. So once they're a little bit settled, we can start to talk to them and then get together. My conversations with the chair of the school board have been they're open to it. I don't think there's any opposition to it. We just need to get the momentum and energy going.
Christina, would be worth it to talk a little bit about. I mean, we had at the 5 chairs meeting on Wednesday, we had quite a bit of discussion around how the entities will work together, hopefully over the next, starting this year, kind of a more collaborative and drawn out process, starting maybe potentially with a new committee. I think that Christina will be bringing a conversation to the FinCom, and Rosie on behalf of Bill will be bringing the conversation to select board, that we're looking at maybe establishing a kind of a working group that would include some professional staff from both towns and the school district, as well as maybe one representative from each of the towns, either elected or appointed boards, to be working on long-range planning and budget forecasting, starting as early as like May or June. After we've settled the budget for FY23, we could start doing that, and then do more to align our budget processes between the two towns and the school, so that we're all working at the same time. Did I capture that conversation correctly, Christina or Rosie?
Yeah, I think so. It seems to me that in the past 2 years that I've been involved, we've had a lot more getting together over the budget process. And I didn't know this, but there was previously some kind of a working group and so there seems to be interest in and commitment to creating more of a year-round steady group of which I think is important and key. So I think we already set a meeting to talk further about setting up a committee that can then have meetings.
Would this committee then advise the school committee?
No, so I guess it wouldn't be a committee because it's from all the different, it's from different organizations, but what working group or something, yeah, more of a communication and coordination.
Great.
Type of
Yeah,
thing.
I think a lot of it comes down to process problems. Having been here for 7 or so months now, it seems like the tag wails the dog with this issue. And so one thing that I want to commit to is moving our budget process so it aligns with the schools, so we don't sort of allow them to sort of stake out this turf and we're left to fight for the rest. We need to collaborate with them. And I totally endorse this idea of a sort of a more collaborative working group, that it has to be not only with some public figures, but also at the administrative level, because we're the ones who are sort of like doing this budget formulation, throughout the year, right? And so, they need to be aware of the sort of fiscal challenges that we're facing in the same way as we need to be aware of their problems, so we can align our budgets, accordingly. Because really, it comes down to, we have 3 entities that are funded out of 2 sort of budgets, and so. And the towns are essentially left trying to match their operation to whatever scraps are left over. And it just is sort of a problematic model, I think. So we're going to move our budget process forward by about 6 weeks, I think, next year. So we can sort of move in lockstep with the schools. And so we can try to be, a little more on top of things with them. I think a constant challenge. So.
Alex, to go, it's Rosie, to go along with that, I think that's one of the important things that we need to bridge, this unbridgeable feeling that the school feels the schools have traditionally, and I don't know why, but you could see at the meeting, they were initially unsure because they don't want us, meaning the town officials, to forget that they are a very important entity. And so one of the most important things for developing developing a working group like this, I think before you get to the hard questions, is to come to an agreement that yes, we do have one giant pot that we're all taking this money from, and that we do need to be cognizant of each other's needs and not dismissive. And I think I saw a willingness to come toward the center in this, and I think to develop an effective working group, we need to develop the relationship before we can hit the hard data. But I'm very hopeful that it can be done. I saw a definitely willingness and heads nodding that if we can all just take a breath and not go into our corners, I think that's the first and most crucial step.
Yeah, you're right. We have to do the work, together in order to sort of see the product together, I think. And it's really that sort of spirit of collaboration was endorsed in that meeting, which is an important step, I think.
Yeah. So hopeful.
Yeah. So, So the general sense that I got is that they will be looking at their budget and seeing if they can find a way to reduce, but we won't know really until we know, I guess. Any other questions on schools right now? We can move on to everyone's favorite, unclassified expenses. So these are sort of the mishmash of things that don't live within any specific department, but they are all things that are very important in their own right. I'll walk through sort of line by line, explain what these are, what changes are, and then we can do questions maybe at the end if that's okay. So salary reserve, we have 3 unions that are up for negotiations right now. This request represents our calculated costs to address those needs. So this should be, we carried a 2.5% increase in this account, knowing that we will likely face 2% increases in salaries plus some other sort of moderate benefits for the unions. That's typically how these things go. In addition, this carries some funding for both the police and fire chiefs who are up for negotiations on their individual contracts as well. Capital spending, this $836,000, this represents a sort of a budgeted free cash number that matches our free cash spend. This number will be reduced by some various offsets, but that essentially represents our capital spend for FY23. Celebrations, this represents the same sort of number that we've had the last few years. The account hasn't really been used so much over the last few years with COVID. The hope is that we can fund some sort of events out of this. There's been 4th of July events, other things like that are funded from this account. Debt service, this is our FY23 number. This is just town debt, not school or water enterprise debt. So this is just the town share of debt. So that's that. State assessments.
What's the decrease?
Excuse me, the decrease is 122,000.
Well, I see the number, but what's
why? There's sorry. A couple things are coming off the schedule. We in FY22 we budgeted for town hall. We are not carrying that number right now. Because we don't have a debt payment for it. And there were a couple of like the one of the landfill loans came off the books. What else? There's a couple of things that are reducing their interest and principal payment numbers are reducing. I've got a debt spreadsheet that we can go over if we want.
The bulk of it though seems to be from the town hall, and therefore it's not a cash reduction. It's more of a budgeting reduction.
Yeah. In the first year, the town hall, I don't think we carried a principal payment. It was just an interest payment the first year in a loan. That's typically how that would work, and so that represents that reduction basically.
Right, thank you.
Yep. State assessments. These are various assessments that the state gives us that we essentially have to pay, unfortunately. Retirement costs going up. This is sort of the Essex retirement system sends us essentially what is a projection number, and then they'll send us actuals. This likely won't change, would be my guess. So an increase of 5.9% there. Unemployment. This is a modest increase to reflect the last couple years worth of actuals. The thought being that even if costs are to increase, that the way the labor market is right now, that unemployment costs hopefully won't grow just because there's a lot of opportunity out there for people to gain employment. Health and life insurance, this is a bit of a surprise. Our rate has gone up 10% on this, right? But our actual budgeted number has seen a slight decrease, and that's because of a number of people who are leaving the town's employment or collecting.
Excuse me, Alex. Alex, sorry. Could we go back for a moment to unemployment?
Yes.
Are those costs for insurance, or are those actual payouts to people?
This is unemployment insurance.
And that's predicated upon prior experience?
Correct. Yep.
Do you know how many people have left our employ and are collecting unemployment?
I don't know top of my head. This is a sort of an HR question, I suppose, but I don't have the specific number. I do know that with COVID, that there were a lot of fraudulent unemployment claims that have had been sort of weeded through and worked through. This is, I think, around a year ago when I think CARES money first began, so maybe a year and a half ago, but there were a number of people within the town that had fraudulent unemployment claims placed against their names. And then so that impacted our sort of unemployment assessments, and it's created this quagmire that is still being sort of dealt with today. So, but the actual costs are, we don't have a specific cost. We have to do some projecting out here with that, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So health and life insurance. So the rates have gone up and the number of users have gone down. That sort of like is the bottom line on that. Other insurance, this is for property casualty. There's specific public safety insurance as well. So this represents those numbers. You'll notice there's a pretty significant increase there. And so that's insurance is going up.
Yeah, but is that just, when you say it's a significant increase based on what, and what is driving that? Is it just the insurance industry, or is it?
Yeah, it's the insurance industry. Things are going up. That's what we're told by our Maya rep, right? So we're part of Maya, which is a municipal, Massachusetts municipal insurance pool. And so it's a large pool of municipalities that join together to spread out risk, right? And so this is how we purchase not only this kind of insurance, but also our health insurance is purchased through them. And so, we get better efficiencies in purchasing power as a large group. And so they have some method for determining how much they need, and they essentially charge us that. Insurance is going, we've been told, so insurance companies attempted to sort of hold the line the last year and a half, 2 years on stuff. And there's everyone saying, get ready because increases are coming next year. That's kind of that's the general line that we've been fed from our various insurance representatives. So there's also, as part of the, this number actually might go up a tad as well. We can absorb it into the water enterprise, but as part of the pre-treatment project, we have to increase our insurance on the water enterprise in the specific treatment building, because it's going to hit a kicker of over $3 million value. We may see a slight premium increase on that. So rates, it's not reflected in our total spend, but the rates, we're anticipating a 10% increase in rates on health insurance as well as property casualty. You just don't see it in our budgeted number though, Nick. Medicare tax, that's pretty flat. It's 1.45% of personnel costs. So that's what's reflected there. The special revenue transfer. So this is something that will be addressed momentarily by Joe, but the thought is a spend to the Patent Homestead Fund to support operations out there. And we'll go into that in more detail momentarily. OPEB, this is a standard $125,000 contribution to OPEB to offset our future liabilities. I personally would like to see more go into OPEB if possible, if we can afford it. Stabilization to meet our
pardon me, Alex.
Yep.
On OPEB, that's subject to a every 2-year actuarial study.
Correct. Yep.
And is the 125 consistent with what our consultant has recommended?
Yeah, I haven't seen we have an actuarial doing work right now, so I haven't seen an updated number on this, but this is consistent with what we were sort of advised to spend in the recent past. Until we get an update saying you can lower it, then I wouldn't consider lowering it, but I would be interested in potentially increasing it just to offset the future liabilities.
Thank you.
No problem. $20,000, this will get us over the hump. I think the actual number is something like 17,000 and change on our general stabilization to meet our 5% requirement there. We're over on our capital stabilization number by a fair amount. That the capital stabilization needs to equal or be over our annual
Rating?
it's the sorry, I'm drawing a
Operating?
blank. What's that, Darcy?
Asset depreciation.
Depreciation, there we go. Our
Replacement,
annual
exactly, yeah.
depreciation, it needs to equal our annual depreciation, and we're about $300,000 over that right now in that. I personally would also like to increase our contribution to capital stabilization, knowing that we have major capital expenses coming down the road, like big time. We're talking the town hall project, as well as the schools have major capital needs over the next 5 years. We need to start planning to spend for that. This represents sort of a minimum, like we're meeting our requirements, but more is better. So something to consider. Just the way that the finances are right now, I didn't want to budget anything over and above sort of our required amounts, but it's something that we need to consider. So there's nothing in the transfer to capital, and then 55,000 transfer to, that's basically our meals tax. Whatever we budget for meals tax goes to HTC as sort of seed funding for them. And so that's what that number is. And the total is 4.75 million.
I'm sorry. Does the 55 for meal tax represent what was actually collected in a prior year?
Yeah, so FY21, our actuals were, I think there were about 58,000. I have them. I don't have the full year of actuals on everything, so I didn't want to include that, but I dropped our budgeted amount on meals tax down just because I didn't want them to plan to spend more than they would potentially have. I don't have a crystal ball. It seems like COVID is, maybe winding down, and who knows if by June and then the following year that it'll be in the rear view and meals tax will go back up. But I think that it would behoove us to be very conservative in our budgeting with that number specifically, just because meals are, like restaurants, are very specifically impacted by COVID. So something to consider there. So some of the drivers of these unclassifieds, capital increases, obviously there is a $497,000 increase in capital spending. That gobbles up more than the total increase. And that is for the DPW sort of building project, like a renovation of the DPW building. That has been sort of approved at the capital committee. Joe and I endorse it as well. There was initial thoughts of spending that over a couple years, but the idea is that because we're not doing the gas tank this year, we had to push it out, that we would put this whole project into a single building phase in order to hopefully find some efficiencies with a single contractor. So we should see some savings if we do it that way. Retirement costs have gone up 70K. So that's a driver. Some other capital projects. Every other year we fund on capital a patrol SUV for the police. So that's in there. A GIS project for water that's been approved and funded. A Patton Park master plan at 25,000, and ECO radio repeaters at I think 28,000 if I remember right.
Alice, what is the Patton master plan?
Sure. So. This is so I should preface this by saying that this has been they have applied for and I think received positive feedback on a CPC fund for this, but this is the planning phase to get a sort of a specific master plan for Patton Park, meaning what does the community want and what are some good options for Patton Park, which is like sort of a jewel of the town, if you will. It's a really interesting sort of centerpiece in town. So what do we do with it into the future? What are the community's needs and what are the sort of the desires for recreation and culture? And this place has a major impact on life in town. And so that is to sort of explore that and look into the future. Joe, you can probably give a little more context.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So, obviously we know how the Patton Park is used currently. We do summer concerts around the gazebo. We have the tennis and basketball courts. We have the playground for kids. The recreation department uses a good portion of the playground and surrounding area for their summer programming. We have the fields that get used. We also have some challenges in that one of the baseball fields kind of floods a little bit. We have some challenges with the proper drainage out of Weaver Pond. We've had a lot of recent requests from different segments of the community. Some folks want us to add more picnic tables. Some folks want us to add a peace garden. Some folks want to be able to have fire pits so that they can sit lakeside and enjoy an evening. There's a finite amount of room down there, and the only real way we're going to be able to get to trying to help get all of these requests met is to really look at the park in total, identify what is usable still, and then find a nice way to have them all complement each other. Sean Timmons, the recreation director, and Tim Olson, the public works director, collaboratively were looking at kind of all the requests they had coming in, trying to balance them against all the existing uses, and came up with the idea of maybe hiring a landscape architect to do kind of a master plan for Patton Park, so we can see how much we get more input from the community, identify the priorities, and figure out how we can best provide for all of these different needs within the park. The first leg of that would be to fund a Patton Park master plan through the CPC. They have applied for eligibility. They have been deemed eligible. They're working on an application for funding. And I think right now we're showing it in the budget at 25,000. It might be a little more than that. Tim was getting quotes right now, and we'll be going back to CPC. So that'll come up as a CPC request at town meeting. And then that plan would be given to us along with some projected costs of how much it would cost us to implement each of the changes, including, like I said, structural changes. How do we better drain Weaver Pond so that we can improve the use of the baseball diamond and the playground, because both the playground and the baseball diamond at times flood because of the drainage problems at Weaver Pond. So having a good set of eyes look at the whole thing as a whole, understand what the uses are, how they complement each other, and give us a plan and estimated costs so that we can then put those estimated costs into the capital plan as well. Not something we would hopefully do all at one time. We might be able to phase it in terms of implementation, but that plan would give us ideas, priorities, and needs. So I kind of wish we had talked about this when Tim and Sean were here. It was their idea. I give them a real big kudos for coming up with the idea, because it is really hard to figure out how to balance the different requests against the current uses. And, we don't want to be in the position of making the determination as just town staff that, oh, we think this is the one we should do. We'd rather get some input through a planning process. So that's what that is.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. I'll pass that on to Sean and Tim because it was theirs.
I'll take credit for it right now if you guys will let me, but just kidding. All right, so moving forward through this, some other drivers, I guess we already touched on all these drivers. So any specific questions on unclassified? No? Okay, so moving forward, Patton, I'm going to hand this off to Joe, and I'm going to retreat to the restroom real quick.
Thanks, Alex. We also have Holly Erickson, the new Patton Homestead Director, here. Holly, like some of the other department heads you've met today, is relatively new to town. She joined us, I think, also in November. We lost our previous Homestead Director back in May, and it took us about 6 months to find a replacement, or 5 months to find a replacement. So real quick, you've got a slide here. There's actually 2 slides, and I'm sorry that Alex left because I won't be able to get to the next one until he returns. This kind of just shows you kind of the historical spend in Patton Homestead. I'll note that last year we did not take any transfer from the general fund to help run Patton Homestead operations. You'll see in FY19 we had taken $90,000. In FY20 we had received $86,000, and in FY21 we went back to $90,000. Last year, in a really difficult environment and trying to implement a year 2 of business planning against the backdrop of a pandemic, we chose to use capital reserves from the Patent Capital Fund as opposed to using general fund money to help with the operation there. Because of that, and because of the improvements we made to the building to accommodate uses like incubate, and because of some increased maintenance costs, because of the better, more complete use of the building, the Patent Capital Fund is no longer really available as a funding option.
In that room all day watching movies. 1 minute, we're trying to do something we want to do.
Somebody's mic is on. And so this year, we are asking for a transfer from the general fund. Alex, can you go to the next slide? So and this is kind of what we're looking at from an expense standpoint for the coming fiscal year. I will say that we've had some good conversations with the Finance Advisory Committee. They had agreed to kind of help us try and start up a business plan to try to make the patent homestead self-sustaining 3 years ago. We're in year 3. We know that we can't just continue to go forward without looking at what our options are. At John McGrath, I think it was one of the ones who suggested John McGrath's recommendation. We're going to be here next week or so putting together a group to help us determine how best to move forward beyond FY23 with patent homestead. But be that as it may, we do have a contract with Incubate. We do have a user in the Wenham Museum. We have the Hamilton Historical Society out there as a tenant. So we do have some kind of obligations to meet in FY23. This is our attempt to meet those obligations while we determine the best way forward beyond FY23. We are lucky to have Holly. No disrespect or negative towards our previous director, but Holly actually comes from a background of event coordination and revenue generation. She's better suited to kind of this next phase of things for us. She's only been on board since November, but I think she ran a very, very successful first event for her out there that I think the public enjoyed. We had over 300 people at the Patent Homestead last weekend on a very, very cold day. All of the vendors who came out to serve food and beverages ran out. That's how popular the event was, and I think that's a positive sign. But again, we've had some positive signs over the last couple of years, and we just need to find a way to get traction and build momentum.
So can the Patent Homestead avail themselves of CPC funding?
They have in the past. We did the roof and storm windows and painted the side of the building. The first year I arrived here, that had been approved before I got here, and Tim ran that project. Unfortunately, as you know, with capital improvements to a building that the town owns, once you reach 30% of the cost of the building over 3 years, so we had spent about $300,000 on that building right around the time I got here, and that was just 3 years ago. So we need to wait till next year to be able to go back to CPC. But so right now we can't this year, but it's something if the town wants, we can look at again in the future. As of right now, we're trying to maintain the building as best we can for the various uses. It hasn't been as much of a revenue generator to this point as we wanted. Again, I think we spent 5 months this year without a director, and that hurt us. But we've seen a lot more use and a lot more interest in the building, which I also think is a positive. At some point, I think this next phase this year, I think a working group has to determine what is it that the town wants out of the property. Do we want it to earn all of its costs? Do we want it to earn some of its costs? Do we want it to provide a public benefit to the community? These are all questions that need to be answered. I think these are all things that we'll be able to answer this year. The 3 years I've been here, I remember I walked in the door knowing nothing about the place, and you didn't have a director and we didn't have a business plan. We've come a long way. We've answered some questions. We've learned some things that we didn't know. We'll be ready to answer the rest of those questions this year. In the meantime, we still need to maintain the building, meet our obligations out there. And I would like Holly to introduce herself, maybe turn on her camera so the folks who haven't had a chance yet to meet her she can say hi and talk about some of her plans for this next year. Holly?
You're muted, Holly, just so you know.
My neighbor is plowing his driveway in this very moment. So my apologies if it is muffled in the next few minutes. I just wanted to thank Joe and Alex for all of their incredible support in helping me to identify opportunities, but also kind of understanding the general budget and the way that the property is used. I think that Joe did an exceptional just now. He did a great job explaining the situation that we find ourselves in. But I also thought it would be worth just explaining to everybody, I wanted to send a special thanks to Tim Olson and Pete Cobb for all of the amazing support that they've also extended to me. They address all of the issues that arise on a daily basis in a timely manner, and I think it's worth acknowledging their support. Some of the things that I obviously am challenged by is, all of the various needs throughout the property, and they're good and they're possibly some great opportunities there, but there are also some unique challenges to identify how the property is best for each individual. The Historical Society, for instance, their budget is something that I believe that the town absorbs. And so, not in seeing this, the Patent Homestead budget is absorbing what it costs to sustain the Historic Society. And then, of course, we also have the Wenham Museum, and they have about 1,500 square feet. And they are an actual tenant that pays the property. But in terms of the actual space, Incubate is probably has the most potential for generating revenue in this coming year. And unfortunately, COVID continues to suppress the usership of that space. So I'm faced with the challenge of trying to identify how to rent the interior of the property, but also really focusing on how to encourage private events and public event usage of the space. It sounds like there's quite a lot of enthusiasm and interest, but it's also, right now it's trying to get people to understand that this is a community asset that is worth using and coming to and frequenting. So I tallied a list. I've got about 40 events in the works. I say events broadly. These are opportunities to support veterans groups. They are a large variety of different types of events, not just, your standard wedding or, workshop, community workshop. What I am looking forward to is trying to identify how to, as Rosie puts it, use non-financial means of meeting expenses. I am actually pretty skilled and creative at trying to kind of work around, getting something done without a whole lot of monetary support. So I'm going to be putting that to good use this year, but I'm also looking forward to collaborating with, as Joe mentioned, a group of people. It sounds like potentially a working group of 5 people who could put together a phased plan and try to identify how the town really wants to use this space, and have a focused approach on how we can make the property self-supporting. So I'm going to leave it there because I think that my neighbor's coming back around, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Before questions, can I just say, I want to add one thing that's not showing on these 2 budget screens. And part of the reason that it's not showing is because it's not sure yet. But again, being ever the optimist, I received communication from Congressman Moulton's office this week. The congressman had included a $55,000 earmark into the federal budget, specifically for the Patent Homestead, to be able to offer specific programming to veterans groups, to groups that service veterans' needs, mental health needs in particular, using the interior and exterior spaces to try to help folks dealing with PTSD and other challenges based on their veteran status. That the federal government hasn't finalized that budget yet, but to date, that earmark is still in the budget. It's in committee, and they're actually expecting a vote in the next month or 2. The congressman is optimistic because at this point it has not been removed from that earmark vote. So they're far along in the process where the House and Senate will both wind up voting on a package they expect. And then, as I said, in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And at this point, that very small amount of funding has not been removed, which is a small amount of funding from the federal government side. But if it comes through, it's $55,000 that will, some of it will actually flow to the Patent Homestead for the use of our space. while some of it will flow to programming to help veterans. So we don't have the exact breakout on that. That was a grant that was applied for, an earmark grant that was applied for through the Patent Homestead Inc., who was not, unfortunately, is not here today, but Mark Johnson did a lot of the legwork on drafting that grant application and getting it into the earmark system with the Congressman's office. I did not include it in the budget because it's not a sure thing, but I definitely wanted to make you aware of it. We're hopeful that that's going to come through this year as well. So,
Joe, we're into the third year of our understanding about the homestead becoming self-sustaining. I wanted to ask you initially, is the 75,000, is that the figure you came to FinCom with initially, or has that changed?
It's adjusted a little bit. I'll defer to Alex. It's gone up about 30,000 from what we were talking about. I was trying to project very, very lean and try to keep it very, very light, but Alex, I think very appropriately, is looking at the fact that, and this is a special reserve account, it's not in the general fund budget. So what is in it once we vote it is all that we have to spend. And Alex, if you want to explain a little bit more how you.
Sure. So my thought there was this property and building has shown that there are consistent capital needs. It's an older building, and I didn't want to.
I classify those as maintenance needs, not capital needs.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. They're maintenance needs. They're not like large projects, but they are so maintenance needs. But more than just like spackling a wall. We're talking about projects, right? So maintenance needs that cost actual money. We don't want to be stuck in the position of not having anything to fund a repair. Say we have a roof leak or a plumbing problem that must be repaired and we don't have money for it, I want us to have a little bit of a safety net to be able to accomplish that. And that was the thought.
And if I could just jump in quickly, I just want to let you know that this comes up on a weekly basis. So
yes.
I couldn't hear you, Holly. I couldn't hear what you said.
I was just saying that these incidents do arise quite frequently. So it is nice to know that there is money for them. Yeah.
Okay. And another question, please. I remember there is some discussion of how one budgets for public works services provided to the homestead.
Indirect.
Is there some?
Yeah, so you'll see, I don't know if you can see my screen right here. This year we've removed indirect costs in order to financially support the operation better. It was my sort of, I don't know if I'll say my call, but it was my idea to remove the indirect costs to charge against that in order to give them a better chance of success.
So conceptually then, Alex, that amount would be added to the 75,000.
Conceptually, I don't know if we actually, well, yeah, conceptually, yes.
So what would the total be?
So we're investing approximately 100,000 in the third year of our understanding.
Yeah, roughly.
High. That's high. That's really high.
As I think I said at FinCom meeting, we have this 3-year agreement, and pardon me, there's no sense in undercutting that. This is initially, Joe, you came to us, or Alex, with the 45,000. We're now up by virtue of the 75 plus the eradication of the indirect to 100,000. I think we're exerting ourselves to try to make this thing work.
I do want to add one thing that just looking at this current slide, that I think a lot of the increase from 45 to 75, if revenues hit, is really just going to increase the fund balance. And I think, I'm guessing what the 75 actually accomplishes is, if revenues are a lot lower than expected, we don't run out of money mid-year. But if things go according to plan, there's actually that cash, the bulk of it will actually be in the fund balance. On that note, I'd also say like we should consider in terms of how this gets funded. I think free cash, something outside of a general appropriation, is more appropriate for this, because the idea is this would be one time as opposed to funding at this level every year, which we know is not sustainable.
But John, I understand, but I also want everyone to appreciate the elimination of the indirect cost, which adds to that 45, now 75.
Oh, no, and I completely agree with that, David, which in the analysis of the homestead, that has to be taken into account. I do think that the question is, because I know this was raised, is what is that true indirect cost? And is 40,000 an accurate reflection? Is it somewhat lower? And it's always going to be somewhat guesswork at the end of the day, but whatever it is, and whether we're actually making a transfer this year or not, we should understand it so that we can look at this thing holistically in terms of decision making as we go forward.
So John, I think that's a great point, and I think that's something Alex and I can work on you as far as identifying what the actual indirect cost of the homestead is. I think one of the things that, and one of the reasons Alex recommended removing that, is that I don't think that the 40,000 is really an accurate depiction of what the level of effort is, right? Way we determine, the formula used to determine indirect costs when you apply it to a fund like this is as a percentage of the overall total budget. So our overall total budget includes everything we're spending on schools and everything else. So you apply a percentage of that and then just tell the patent fund that you have to pick up a piece of that. It's not really realistic. It doesn't really define the level of effort that goes into managing the separate account. So Alex and I can work on stringing that out to show what that level of effort really is. But and if the finance committee and the select board want us to add it back in, we can. I am also happy to look at the use of free cash in this. We have enough free cash that we'd be able to do that, as opposed to having it be a general fund appropriation through taxation. Open to all of those things. I think obviously there's a lot more discussion, as with all the rest of the budget. You know, the select board and the FinCom will be discussing the budget proposal here over their next couple of meetings before we finalize in the beginning of March, end of February, beginning of March. And so we got time to really understand the best ways to put this forward. We just wanted this budget proposal to be a starting point. So.
Right.
Okay, so do we want to continue this conversation now, or do we want to move on?
Could I ask you to go to the previous slide just quickly?
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. Yep. All right, so Joe, you want to take the this guy here?
Yeah, so we said at the top of the presentation that the budget we're proposing is actually balanced. It's within our means, and by that we mean it does not require a Proposition 2.5 override, and it effectively delivers level service to all of the various areas. That's not to say that we feel like we're providing for everything that the town actually needs. We were asked at the most recent 5 boards meeting, well, if we make a cut in the school side, what other types of things could you spend that money on? This is just a quick list of some of the things that we are not looking to, and you've talked about some of them during the course of the meeting. Health department staff, currently all of our health department staff are part-timers. We may here, as we move forward in the regional effort, identify things that we need to add there. We're not proposing that this year. Finance assistant, we have a part-time instead of an FTE, which we know is a harder position to fill, and B, we have enough work that we probably need a full-time person there. We're funding grants by asking for money for consulting, but we are not adding an FTE. We've all agreed, I think, in different various meetings that the town needs more investment in grants, and we recognize that an investment in grants will pay itself back, more than the investment. But we don't really have the option here right now to put a person, even a part-time person, into the budget. Director of assessing, we're reducing from our current FTE complement in the assessor's office, and we're proposing to go forward in a different model to find efficiency. We wouldn't be able to hire a full-time certified assessor on our own, not at what the market is demanding for those right now. Public safety personnel, both chiefs have been looking to add professional staff. I think they did a great job of explaining that to you, why, and we're not making any recommendation for additional staff in those departments. Conservation agent hours. There are a number of different ways we can look at this. Is it adding in the future? Is this adding hours to the conservation agent, or is it adding additional resources to support the agent, either contract services or clerical help? I don't know, but we're not right now. We're not making any recommendations for anything there other than what we have. Capital needs have been pushed out into the future, and that's by necessity. But we have a lot of capital needs. We can't just keep kicking the can down the road. We're making more of a capital investment this year than we have in the previous 2 years. That's some progress, but we're still leaving ourselves, with a big investment needed in the future. And we're making minimal contributions to the general stabilization fund and no contribution at all to capital stabilization fund, as well as a minimal contribution to OPEB. If we get a little bit more clarity here, we may develop the budget. If there's additional resources available to us, we may look to amend this and add a little bit more to capital or OPEB or somewhere. Those are things that we actually have to invest in. Right now, we're meeting our minimums. We're not doing anything more than that, and we're not really planning for the future. But we have our eyes on it, and we understand that these are costs that we're going to have to take on soon. So, there are a lot of areas that we feel we could make improvements and deliver better product to our residents, but we are at least able to maintain this year.
Joe, this is great, and I'm really glad you went through the process of doing that. And I would say this going forward should always be a part of these budget presentations, because I think too often we focus on cutting everything as far as we can go. And what a lot of times gets lost is what are the things that have never even made it to print and never even made it because they were cut before it was even presented. So even, I would say being able to put numbers against some of these things would be helpful in the future. But this is really a good way to look at things.
I have a question. Can you describe what the lack of conservation agent hours, what impact that has on either the citizens of town or on the operation of the town? Like, what effect does that have, not having enough hours?
I think, like Rosie noted, that Brian's been doing a pretty good job in his limited number of hours at being able to identify when people have violated conservation, but it's almost always after the fact. He hasn't had the time to actually be looking forward and anticipating things. It also leaves us, overworking an employee, asking him to do more than his hours allow him to do, to make sure that all the requests and projects that come before us are being looked at properly. Again, I'm not sure that we need to give Brian more hours. We definitely need to give him some more resources somehow. And that's something we'll try to build into the FY24 budget. I, again, don't know if that means more hours. I don't know if he even really wants more hours. I know the position was attracted to him at the number of hours it was because of his other professional endeavors, but part-time clerical help or consulting help to take on some of this work on the side so that he doesn't have to do everything. Those types of things might be things that we can look at in the future to make that part of the operation have more benefit to the town overall.
Joe, if I could just add a word or two. This is Patrick Reffett. Brian Colleran tells me that he's scrambling to simply respond to the statutory requirements of filings that come in the door. He doesn't have the ability to look at the kinds of things that are quality of life kinds of interactions that he'd like to provide to the community and to his counterparts. There are a number of elements as part of the master plan, I'm sure, that are going to involve open space, or going to involve wetlands, habitat, and those kinds of concerns that I know are really important to the community, and I'd like to be able to engage in some of those. But in that, his time is 100% plus focused on just the statutory requirements that come in the door. He's constrained greatly.
Okay, Alex, next slide. I thank everybody for taking the time. Particularly, I thank our department heads who do so much for us on a day-to-day basis in their regular work hours, to spend so much time here with us to help us answer questions and present our proposal for the FY23 budget. We welcome any leftover questions from either of the boards or any of the members. And what can we do?
I just want to express my appreciation to Joe for this presentation, and especially to Alex, who's during his short tenure shown a very impressive degree of knowledge and commitment to the community welfare.
Yeah, I think I would also make a comment that it's Rosie. I'm not exactly the most financially inclined person. My philosophy is always, if you don't need it, don't buy it. But anyhow, I resist these in-depth financial conversations in life in general. And I have to compliment Dave, Alex, and certainly all the department heads in making this surprisingly interesting and very educational for me. So thank you.
Yeah, I echo those comments, thanking that Alex and Joe, as well as all the department heads, in terms of the work put into this. And it's this is becoming a pretty well-oiled machine in terms of these budget presentations and the process. In terms of where we go from here, I do want to highlight one thing from the FinCom perspective. I know several of the select board members have been exposed to the projection tool that we've developed. I'd like to take some time at a future select board meeting to sort of walk through that model. This is, today's presentation is really focused on this upcoming budget, whereas our model then looks at various scenarios, 5 years into the future. We've got some work to do with Capcom and Alex this week in terms of finalizing that, but it should be then very easy then to look at the model in terms of with the proposed FY23 budget baked in there, and then we can sort of talk about how it can be used by various committees, et cetera. But I don't want to waste any more time today talking about it, because we're almost 4 hours into this. But I just wanted to flag that for a future meeting in the very near future.
Yeah, John, with your permission, I'll ask Bill Olson if it would be suitable to do that at the second meeting in February. Around that time, we should be finishing up each of your committees should be finishing up your budget deliberations and questions and finalizing some things internally administratively. And then March will be finalizing the warrant. So I think that might be a good time. And I think that we've requested that you attend the next leadership conference group, the former umbrella group, which I think is coming up on February 10th to show your model to those folks again as well. So you'll have a couple chances here to very publicly show the folks of the town what you're working on, and we appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Joe.
I'd like to end just by thanking, John just alluded to the quote unquote well-oiled machine. I'm appreciative of all the department heads that participate with us in this process. I'm very appreciative of all the effort that Alex, and by extension Diane and the other folks in the finance department have given us this year. We're building a really good team that's really working well together, and certainly this isn't any one person's work product you see in front of you. It's the work product of about 13 to 14 people working very hard on this over the last 2.5, 3 months. So thank you all. Thank you to my department heads, and thank you all for giving us your time today.
Bill, may I make a motion?
Bill's not on, but yes, you,
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
If I could just say for the record, whoever the minutes taker is, I think it's Mary Alice, Bill left the meeting at 11:02. He informed Jamie, and Jamie became the de facto chair of the meeting at that time. So
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
all right. Roll call vote for the motion to adjourn the select board. Rosie,
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Sean,
Sean Farrell, aye.
and Jamie Knutson, aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Yeah, thank you
I
all.
have a motion to adjourn the FinCom committee meeting.
I move to adjourn the FinCom meeting.
That
Second,
was Nick Tenson, second by John Coolidge. Actually, before we do, I should add that Christina Schenk-Hargrove, that's me, I joined the meeting a few minutes after it started, and Nick Tenson also joined a few minutes after the meeting started. We've been here. So we have a motion and a second. So let's vote on adjourning. Nick,
Nick Tenson, aye.
David,
Yes, aye.
John McGrath,
Coolidge, aye.
John Coolidge,
John McGrath, aye.
Christina Schenk-Hargrove, aye. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Be
Everyone.
safe. everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.